Workshop for the Commonwealth Transportation Board on December 6th. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Much. First time on the agenda, Angel Deem is going to talk to us about the State Trails Office update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board, and I am indeed going to provide a status update on the State Trails Office. So first, by way of review, Deputy Secretary Lawson provided an overview of the State Trails Office at the board's September meeting that included all the information that you see on this slide, introducing the general concept and intent for the State Trails Office. It has received general fund dollars most recently in June of this year, and the CTB is to prioritize funds for new regional trails, those that improve connectivity with the existing network and provide geographic diversity with those trails. It also directs the establishment of the office here at VDOT, and that office is primarily responsible for development of a state trails plan and information clearinghouse. The office is to coordinate with a number of entities, but namely the State Trails Advisory Committee and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Also, by way of review, in September, Deputy Secretary Lawson also provided you all with this investment snapshot from 2021 to 2024, with a total of $89 million in general fund dollars being allocated for investments in multi-use trails. In addition to that, the recent budget also articulated a requirement to direct $7 million per year from the FY23 and 24 Transportation Alternatives Program. That $7 million was seen as an uplift for that program from IIJA. In terms of funding, and also in September, this board authorized funding for up to $1 million to support pre-scoping activities for each of the 5 priority trails that we'll review again today. And I would also note that there will be a Transportation Alternatives Program presentation following this one to recommend actions to this board to complete that $14 million commitment from the TAP program. Okay, so on to the updates since that September briefing. The General Assembly action earlier this year did authorize 3 positions to staff the State Trails Office, and as we discussed in September, VDOT is advancing with 2 of those positions while holding the 3rd in reserve as we see what the workload will look like going forward. I'm happy to report today that both positions are in active recruitment and should close by the middle of December. Again, by way of review, those 2 positions, one will be in our local assistance division, which will manage the application intake and selection process as appropriate. They will develop and execute agreements with localities where that's applicable, but overall they will manage the financial requirements pursuant to projects funded through the State Trails Office or through local assistance managed funding programs. The planning division has the other position, and again, that is to manage the office, responsible for statewide coordination and partnering with the various entities, and also overseeing the development of the all-important State Trails Plan, as well as that information clearinghouse. Our planning staff will also oversee development of any trail-related studies that VDOT is charged with. They will develop guidance and also recommended policy for this board's consideration. In terms of update, we have secured consultant resources to help us with the State Trails Plan and Information Clearinghouse. So they are just getting started with some early scoping activities to include an inventory of existing trails, trail facilities where VDOT has some level of engagement. We've also done some early coordination with Department of Conservation and Recreation, sharing data and information with them, as well as obtaining GIS files on existing active and abandoned rail lines from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Both of these will inform those early scoping activities. And then lastly, we presented to the statewide Trails Advisory Committee in late October. Okay. So again, the budget process contemplated specific priority trails, and this list of 5 trails was provided to the Secretary of Transportation in August of this year, and we discussed those to some extent in September. The primary purpose of this slide is what's on the right-hand side, which is to caution that the information provided should be considered preliminary. We still are very actively working on looking at each of these and the status that they are in. So the information that we're presenting is based on project status, readily available information. We are in the process of developing or validating scope schedules and costs. And any ownership or maintenance responsibility that you see indicated may or may not be finalized for a particular trail. Okay. Before we move into specific trail updates, we did want to share a little bit about rail banking and rails to trails. And the reason for that, in the middle of the slide, you'll see that there are 3 trails that are engaged with the rail banking process. So rail banking was established in 1983 as an amendment to the National Trails System Act. It is a voluntary agreement between the railroad and a trail sponsor to use an out-of-service rail corridor. And essentially, this allows preservation of the nation's rail corridors that otherwise would have been abandoned. So it allows the railroad to divest itself of the responsibility for an inactive line, and then it identifies an interim trail manager to do just that, manage the trail in the interim, with the condition that it can be returned to active rail service should that be necessitated. So 2 of the corridors, Eastern Shore Trail and Tobacco Heritage Trail, have existing rail banking agreements. The Shenandoah Valley Trail is anticipated to have one of those. And in general terms, at a very high level, the process is that the rail line owner files for abandonment with the Surface Transportation Board. An interim trail manager then steps up and files a statement of willingness, also with the STB, that they are willing to take on those responsibilities. Any environmental analyses or assessments that are necessary are conducted along with appraisals. And the parties have a year to negotiate an agreement that is executed by the STB. And that, we understand, can even be extended to up to a 3-year period. And I'd also note that that interim trail manager, a qualified interim trail manager, can be either a trail organization or a government agency. So here are the 5 priority trails just presented to you on a map, so you can see the geographic distribution of these trails. And then we'll walk through them generally from west to east. First, we have the Craig-Botetourt Scenic Trail, rail to trail. This 26-mile trail is located in VDOT Salem District, obviously in the localities of Botetourt and Craig. This is also referred to as the Craig Valley Trail. It is a former rail corridor that was abandoned in the 1960s and the property transferred to the Department of Highways. So this is an example of one that went through the full abandonment process. Obviously was not rail banked. Tracks and ballasts have been removed, but there are rail bridges that remain in place. VDOT owns the corridor by deed. However, the ultimate ownership disposition is to be determined. So a Craig-Botetourt Scenic Trail assessment was just completed last month, and that looked at some history and an inventory of the existing conditions and a preliminary look at the 5 bridges that exist along the corridor. Both counties have formed stakeholder groups to help guide trail development to determine the scope and intent of this trail. We understand that the county leadership and VDOT staff and Delegate Austin had an early meeting, but intend to meet again in early December to discuss that scope and scale of this trail. So following that, VDOT would anticipate beginning scoping and the necessary preliminary engineering to arrive at a better cost and schedule for this trail. Next, we have the Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail. So this 48-mile trail is in VDOT's Stanton District, traversing the localities of Rockingham, Shenandoah, and Warren. It's intended as a paved surface trail. It's currently owned by Norfolk Southern. The cost range that you see here is informed by a 2021 feasibility study completed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I would also note that the corridor passes within a mile of Seven Bend State Park in Woodstock and Newmarket Battlefield State Historical Park, both DCR properties. The entire rail line is within the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District.
Secretary?
Yes, sir, Mr. Stamp.
Can you go back to that previous slide? How much of that cost estimate is for payment, if any, to Norfolk Southern for the abandoned right-of-way?
That is to be determined. So that's what is negotiated during that agreement process to determine what the value will be
So
to the rail owner.
We do expect to pay Norfolk Southern
Yes, sir.
significant amount of money for an abandoned railroad.
Significant.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Merrill.
An amount.
There has, the group has received an appraisal, and I don't think it's for public information at this point because it was intended to keep confidential so that Norfolk Southern would not know what the appraisal was. But there has been an appraisal
How
of
do you
that.
appraise an abandoned railroad line?
There are people who do
Carefully.
that.
Steam.
Again, that feasibility study was completed by Department of Conservation and Recreation, so that's good information for us. We also are well aware, as this board is, of third-party discussions that have been occurring with Norfolk Southern pertaining to their existing property. I would also note that there's an FY23 congressional earmark that is pending in the amount of $3 million intended for preliminary engineering. So we would see the next step for this trail would be for formal proceedings for rail banking to be initiated. And again, back to my previous comments, that would mean Norfolk Southern filing for rail abandonment and a qualified interim trail manager, then filing that statement of willingness and negotiations would ensue. Understanding that a lot of work has been done, again, with those third-party discussions that have been ongoing. Next, we have an urban trail within the city of Lynchburg, a 2-mile trail. There are 2 parks at either end of this proposed trail, Ivy Creek and Peak View. Both are owned and managed by the city of Lynchburg, so this trail would connect those 2 properties and is assumed to be owned and maintained also by the city of Lynchburg. The city completed a feasibility study in 2019 that looked at a very initial trail concept that included things such as the width of the trail. So we would see the next step being to work with the city to affirm the scope and then arrive at a cost estimate for this trail. Next, we have the Tobacco Heritage Trail. Specifically here, we're referring to a 2-mile section in Mecklenburg County in VDOT's Richmond District. I would note that the Tobacco Heritage Trail in its entirety and at completion would include over 160 miles of abandoned railroad right-of-way, and sections of this right-of-way have been preserved through rail banking to date. And currently, there are 23 miles open for use. The proposed trail is the 2-mile segment you see in blue on the graphic. Please note that the purple line to the right represents where the existing trail terminates, And so obviously this creates a gap and something that we would want to investigate further. That gap is 1/8 of a mile from Skipwith Road to the trailhead in Boynton. The ownership and maintenance for this trail is the Roanoke River Rails to Trails. So the larger master plan for Tobacco Heritage is currently being updated with an anticipated completion in early 2023. Our initial outreach was through the local planning district commission, and we were able, through that outreach and outreach with the Secretary's office, able to conclude that specifically this priority segment is that 2 miles in Mecklenburg. So the necessary next step would be to begin preliminary engineering, come up with a scope, schedule, and cost necessary, and then, of course, investigate that connectivity issue. What options may be available. Then lastly, we have the Eastern Shore Trail. This is a 46-mile trail in VDOT's Hampton Roads District, traversing Accomack and Northampton counties, as well as the 12 incorporated towns along its length. It is a 10-foot wide multi-use paved path that traverses the former Bay Coast Railroad. The cost estimate you see there is informed by a feasibility study done in 2020, as well as some current Round 5 smart scale applications. The corridor is owned by Canoni Atlantic Company, and this is a company fully owned by the Accomack Northampton Transportation Planning District Commission. The feasibility study was done in 2020 by VDOT. That same year, the corridor was rail banked by the Eastern Shore Rail to Trail Foundation and the Bay Coast Railroad. As I mentioned, the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission has submitted 4 separate smart scale Round 5 applications for this corridor. They've also secured a $2.5 million congressional earmark for a shared use path from Cape Charles from the Cape Charles Park and Ride lot at Route 13 to Cape Charles. So this is what extends the trail's length to 49 miles. I would also note that the rails, ties, and signals have been removed, and the rail bed here has been graded, and there are no rail bridges or tunnels along this corridor. The next step here would be to begin preliminary engineering to advance this corridor to final design and construction. So pulling back up at a high level, next steps, we look forward to in early 2023 beginning in earnest stakeholder and public outreach on the state trails plan. Regarding the priority trails, we're going to continue to do what we've been doing over the past 6 weeks or so, developing or validating scope schedules and estimates and determining where PE or environmental review requirements are necessary, again, to inform trail planning. I would note that the Trails Office is identifying these things. They may or may not be involved in executing next steps, but certainly will partner with the appropriate trail owner proponents as necessary. And Mr. Secretary, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Deem.
Secretary?
Yes, sir, Mr. Coleman.
I haven't been on the board long, but I have to ask the question, why is VDOT responsible for trails? Wouldn't it be more appropriate under Parks and Recreation or some other agency within the state? I don't know why that fell under VDOT. Is that the most appropriate place for it to be?
Mr. Coleman, I think the answer is the trail scenario in Virginia is a patchwork of responsibilities at this point and ownerships. I think we've seen some of that. I don't know if it's been at the board level or not, but I've seen it, and it's a bit of a checkerboard sort of looking situation. I believe the General Assembly assigned this to us. That's the answer. That's the short answer.
Okay.
The longer answer is I think they have confidence in our ability for planning and engineering and number crunching and so forth and so on. And so we're working closely with our friends and recreational trails at DCR, et cetera, to make sure we're all on the same page. And where it all ends up, we'll see. But for now, we've been given money and directed to establish an office and to get about these, so that's what we're doing, but we're doing it in coordination. I would add to that, one of the things that we've been talking about with our friends in the legislature who ultimately put forth the money, with the governor's approval, is that we're building a hungry animal here. And we need to ensure, it's sort of like somebody having 10 kids, you know, like, okay, but like, 10 kids is not only hard to manage, they eat a lot. and they've got to go to school, and they got to get in vehicles and go places, and it's expensive. And I know the commissioner would share his concern if you asked him that we fully bake in what these things are going to cost going forward. I indicated to you that it's a patchwork. So some of these trails have nonprofits associated with them that are substantial. Others do not. But at the end of the day, if we're owning it, then we're going to be expected to maintain it. And that money comes out of us to do so. And our money is formula-based, does not, you know, it does not change necessarily based on the assignment. Now, obviously, they gave us some money here to get started. The question is, what follows in the future, and how do we do that? So the long answer, the real answer is we're not really sure where it's going to be, where it's going to end up, but those are some of the concerns that we have, and we'll work through them. Stamp.
Is this new trail office going to develop a policy on how to identify new trails? I mean, what doesn't appear, it just appeared that we inherited these 5 trails that are up there, and they just came to us, and there they are. And what do we do going forward?
Well, the legislature can direct us to do what the legislature directs us to do with the approval of the governor. So I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but obviously part of what we would be doing in the Trails Office is developing policies as to how these things might come to us, and you know, with their concurrence, of course, and things like how do you deal with maintenance and third-party interim trail managers, and there's lots to be done there, Mr. Snap. Mr. Kaspertz.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. You identified that we've kind of inherited these projects, and we're stepping into a process that's already underway. 5 different projects, 5 different timelines, 5 different funding schedules, and of course 5 different entities that are controlling it. In that we have funds to allocate ultimately, have we started the process of trying to identify the funding requirements for each of the projects specifically from a time perspective, so that we make sure that to the extent possible, if there are opportunities that require a specific funding window, that we don't miss those while we're developing our policy and putting our trail office together? I know that with real estate transactions, sometimes timing is critical, and if we're not there with funds at the appropriate time, we may lose that opportunity. So the question is, are we moving in the direction of having a consolidated financial plan that at least identifies the requirements of these 5 individual entities?
Yes, sir. So what we've been working on, as is still on the slide, is the development or validation, if one exists, of those cost estimates to inform next steps, to inform those entities that would engage in fully funding these trails to their fruition. So I think what remains to be determined is the extent to which the Trails Office will participate in that funding, to what extent. So each of the trails has up to $1 million is allocated by this board in September to do that work.
I guess my question is just so, as a planning tool for us and understanding, you know, the status of these trails, the funding piece of it is something we could do at the front end, I'm assuming, with information provided by these 5 entities. Is that something we can work on early on so we at least understand the requirements? We may not be able to meet them, nor even identify that we ultimately want to. But the success of those projects is going to be based on their ability to fund fully if their representations are accurate.
Right.
I just want to make
That's
sure that we're
absolutely
early
what
in
we're
the
doing.
process.
Yep.
And
That's absolutely where our focus has been over the last 4 to 6 weeks, to try to get our arms around what the scope is so that we can either validate an estimate that exists or bring it current or develop one. As is most often the case, one needs to be developed.
Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Merrill.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Mr. Casper's comments, the legislature, as you said, Mr. Secretary, directed that these 5 trails be priorities. 3 of the trails are already owned by political subdivisions, including the Boda Trail being owned by VDOT already, based upon the information you provided. Is there a way that we can move in parallel fashion with trying to negotiate with the existing trail owners for the Eastern Shore Trail in the Shenandoah to start negotiating what the acquisition price would be? I recognize you don't want to write a blank check and say, to your analogy about 10 children, what they're going to require over the next 50 years to maintain these trails. But to Mr. Casper's points, I do feel like there's a window to be able to advance negotiation, find out exactly what the purchase price is. And we already own one in the Boda Trail, which is 26 miles that VDOT owns, and it's going to have to be developed. And as with many trails, they're developed in schedules and sequences. So I worry that we, number one, will lose these funds. Number two, that the grants that have been appropriated may disappear if we're not moving forward. And having them in our inventory would allow us the flexibility to move forward in the future.
I'd call it a critical funding schedule as a starting point.
Mr. Secretary.
Dr. Smoot.
Thank you. Angel, in the Rails to Trails program, which is a federal program, I did not hear you say that the payment to the railroad would produce fee simple ownership of the right-of-way.
That's correct.
So what are we paying them for?
For use of the corridor.
It's
And so the agreement that gets executed, the rail banking agreement that gets executed, would detail that cost. It would also detail a cost back to the interim trail manager should the corridor revert back to active rail use, as well as other conditions around, site assessments, et cetera.
So, Dr. Smith, the rail banking agreements are not cookie cutter agreements. It could be different for different projects. And so it's not just applying one sort of here it is deal. And in general, if you rail bank, there's some period of time, which could be much longer or less, where the railroad has a right to come back, given certain things, and reacquire the rail line. And so it's it can get complicated, and the money piece gets complicated, and I hear my colleagues down here, but it's also takes some time to work through some of that. Because we have us and natural resources involved here, in the case of of some of these trails, Canoni owns the trail. It's not an issue of acquiring it. In the case of some of these, we do need to acquire it, in case we've talked about the Norfolk Southern piece. So what that rail banking would look like is something that we need to be comfortable with, no matter who negotiates it, so that it's something we're willing to assume. So it's, it gets a little bit complicated. We're moving as fast as we can. I think Mr. Kasperitz and Mr. Merrill given that. And we have a certain amount of money that's been given to us, and we're trying to determine how that fits into what we've been asked to do. And so I can't give you a quick answer today, but I can tell you we're working on it every day to get it there, and that's what we intend to do.
So at this point, we really don't know when we make a payment to the railroad whether the right-of-way could be used for other public purposes, be it railroad, utility, corridors, or whatever.
That would be part of the agreement.
To be part of each agreement.
We would not make a payment to them without that being determined first.
Right. And also the length of use, I assume, would have to be negotiated case by case.
That's correct.
Well,
That's
okay.
why I said they're not cookie cutter. Casper?
Mr. Secretary, I guess as we go forward and develop the policy for this, I've mentioned this in prior discussions, the right of reversion to some type of transportation use, I think, is very important, certainly to some members of this board as well. And it's a complex question, but I'd like to make certain that that's part of the discussion going forward. Contiguous corridors, we have two under discussion today that are 50 miles long. The prospect of ever recreating those corridors is virtually non-existent from a cost perspective and from the pain that would come from a public taking. So I'd just like to make sure that as we move forward, we do so with a plan to allow for the reversion of these trails, perhaps to a transportation use or a transportation and recreation use at some point in the future. And to the extent that we do that, it will probably guide and in some cases restrict the amount of additional development that's available on those right-of-ways. Things like water lines and sewer lines might in fact limit the potential for a reversion to a future rail or transportation use. So going forward, I'd just like to make sure that's part of the discussion and part of what we're looking at and incorporate in our
100%.
contracts.
That's what makes it a little bit complicated.
Very, very complicated.
So yeah, that's exactly what we're dealing with.
Thank you.
Secretary,
Yes, Mr. Merrill.
I certainly acknowledge your comments about the difficult work that your team has undertaken, and that's appreciated. But my question is, but can we not work in a parallel fashion as opposed to a sequential fashion for these two trails to be explored as to what those negotiated prices may be? That's additional information we're going to need as opposed to serial wait till the trails office gets set up, wait till the people get hired, start the exploratory.
We're not waiting for people to be hired, Mr. Merrill. We're working on it every day. I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you talking about the Shenandoah Trail specifically?
Shenandoah and also the Eastern Shore about trying to execute an agreement for a purchase price. I hear that the Eastern Shore Trail is owned by us.
There's no purchase price of the Eastern Shore.
It's not.
No.
So the only one left is the Shenandoah Rail Trail. So the Eastern Shore is going to come into the state's ownership?
No, sir.
No, it would be owned by the entity.
It's owned by the counties.
It's owned by the county. Public body that she says is a subsidiary, that this company is a subsidiary of the public body.
We're not anticipating acquisition costs for that. We are anticipating acquisition costs for the Shenandoah Trail. And what the rail banking agreement, which we would absolutely, to Mr. Kaspritz's point, want to have considered in any of these, the complexity of that does not allow us to give you an answer today. But we're not waiting on these other things to happen to work on that, if that answers your question.
So of the 5 trails, 4 are already ownership by governmental agencies. Richmond, Lynchburg, the public agency in the Eastern Shore, and Botetourt is owned by VDOT. So 4 of the 5 are currently owned by,
Well, yeah, we don't anticipate acquisition costs. Let's leave it there.
so the only one that does have an acquisition cost then is the Shenandoah Rail Trail.
John, Mr. Deputy Lawson.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Merrill, just for a point of clarification, I think with the $1 million in scoping money that we talked about being available to these projects, it is allowing us to get our hands around where each of the different trails stand in their development cycle. And this will allow us to work each trail and start to move them forward as they can move forward. So it's to your point, we're not sequentially working through each step before we get to them. We are going to try to advance each one individually as we can advance them. But we have to know what we are advancing before we can do that fully.
I think your point is sooner is better than later. We need to make sure we take advantage of the opportunities that are presented along the way.
Correct.
100% agree.
And don't miss them.
Yes.
And especially since 4 of the 5,
If we missed them, we didn't take advantage of them.
especially since we have access to 4 of the 5 trails through some government agency or they're already owned by a municipality.
Mr. Merrill, we're not just going to go down there and start throwing money around, right? We got to know what we're dealing with. We got to have good estimates. We got to understand who individual trail managers are going to be. We got to understand what we're trying to create. We've got to understand what it's going to cost. We got to understand life cycle. It's not just quick to do all those things, but we will move expeditiously. That's the plan.
I hope you would appreciate that I understand most of those variables.
And I understand sequential versus, at the same time. I understand that as well.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to say, Mr. Merrill, that it takes a period of time. Lynchburg's got 40 miles right now of trails, urban trails. So we're looking for the 2.2, but it takes a while to accumulate everything. Thanks.
Dean, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
The only thing I wanted to add, just to clarify, the Craig Botetourt Trail, while VDOT owns that by deed currently, you'll note that the slide indicated ownership was to be determined, so I think there's more conversation to be had even around that trail as far as the ultimate disposition for ownership.
Anybody else? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dean. The next item on the agenda is Mr. Russ Dudley with the TAP program. The Transportation Alternatives Trails Allocation, part of the TAP program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. Today I'm going to ever so briefly continue the conversation on trails, but specifically regarding the TAP allocations that we need to wrap up for the money that was mentioned by Ms. Dean in a previous presentation. So let me go to the next slide. So as you might recall, Deputy Secretary Lawson noted in September that budget language required us to place $14 million of TAP, Transportation Alternative Program funding, from the 23 and 24 allocations on multi-use trail projects. He also noted that during our selection process, we funded just under $12 million to applications for trail projects, that leaving approximately $2.2 million for future allocations. Today, I want to provide the board with our proposal for these future allocations. So as just a reminder, this is where the trail, the TAP money went for trails in this last application period. So we had 16 trail projects that were funded in 7 different districts, so a nice distribution there. The remaining allocations of roughly $2.2 million, we are recommending that to first fully fund any applications that were not originally fully funded during this last TAP selection process. So we have 3 of those, 2 in the District of Richmond District and 1 in Salem District, totaling $326,495. Next, we are recommending to fund the next highest scoring trail projects from the 23 and 24 application cycle within localities that are ready to utilize this funding. We have 2 of those. The first is the Meadow Creek Shared Use Path and Bridge in Charlottesville. The city requested $1 million to continue an existing project. They currently have $300,000 in TAP funding on this project, and the allocation will help construct 2,000 linear feet of a larger shared use path, and will begin will construct a pedestrian bridge over Meadow Creek. Next project, or the second project, is Mason Creek, is a portion of Mason Creek Trail in Fairfax County, and this will fund a mile-long segment of the proposed 6-mile-long Mason Neck Trail. 3 miles of this 6-mile-long segment trail has already been constructed, and the county has requested $800,000 in TAP funding to support this project. That's all I have for the recommendations for the trails. If there's no objections, next month Ms. Payne will include these allocations in her monthly revisions to the SYIP. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Ms. Sellers.
So I do notice Fredericksburg is not represented on here. Did we not provide any trail projects?
Fredericksburg had no eligible trail projects.
We had no eligible trail projects?
They had no trail projects. No projects that met the definition of a trail.
Okay.
For this last funding cycle, we have funded lots of trail projects in Fredericksburg District. They've got a beautiful trail network up there.
Yeah, and I know on the current smart scale projects, we have quite a few trails, so in this round, we just didn't have any.
They just didn't have any.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Dudley. Next item on the agenda is item 3, it's the Recreational Access Program in Brunswick, Montgomery, and in the town of Rappahannock. Mr. Dudley.
Continue up here for the next presentation. We can get that rolling. So today I have 3 recreational access program project allocations to provide to you in Brunswick, Montgomery, and Tappahannock. As just a reminder, this slide provides a brief overview of the program. The program provides funding for the construction, reconstruction, or improvement of access roads or bike lanes to publicly available recreational or historic sites. The table at the bottom of this slide provides the maximum allocations available. And you may note when it's a locally operated facility, there's a match required from the locality so that they can get the maximum state allocation available. It's moving slow. Those are the 3. And I'm too quick to the trigger here. All right, so our first one is Herman Road, Lake Gaston Day Use Site in Brunswick County. This is located adjacent to Route 903 and Lake Gaston in Brunswick County. The project will provide access to Lake Gaston and other recreational opportunities. And this, if I didn't say it already, this is a brand new park. New day use site is just under 15 acres in size, and the proposed access road will extend just under 600 feet from Route 903 to a proposed parking area. The road will replace a portion of an existing private road which provides access to several residents along the property. The next slide will show that a little more clearly. Brunswick County has requested the maximum state allocation for this project of $350,000, which does require a $100,000 match on their part. This is an aerial showing the project. You'll notice the red is the access road, and you see the existing private road just to the west of that. The proposal is to abandon that access, provide access to the residents down the road on their private road from the recreational access road. So the recreational access road will tie into the private road before it extends to the parking lot. Sir.
Secretary,
Mr. Stant.
just a question again.
I'll back up here.
Why in the world is VDOT building a road going to a boat launch area? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean,
Well, Mr. Stant, I don't know.
somebody
what-
has to do it.
I don't know what to tell you, but we have a program, it's called the Recreational Access Program. It's established by the legislature and signed by whatever governor was there at the time, and that's what it instructs us to do, so that's the answer.
Okay.
It's a road, that's why. Mr. Dudley.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next site. And then our next property is Auburn Park, located adjacent to Route 8 in Montgomery County. This is another new park, and the project will provide access to that park, and there's the location map. Auburn Park is expected to be about 38 acres in size, which will be operated and maintained by Montgomery County. The project is about 900 feet in length and will provide access from Route 8 to the primary parking area of the park, and I have a picture of that here in the next slide. We will see a little more detail in that. The project will also include additional right and left turn lanes off Route 8, so the estimate you see here is a bit higher than our typical recreational access project. Again, Montgomery County has requested the maximum state allocation for this project of $350,000, so they will be required to provide a $100,000 match on their part. Schematic of the access road. Just FYI. Road will be 24 feet wide and, as I mentioned, 950 feet long. And finally, we have Hoskins Creek Park, the access road to Hoskins Creek Park, which is again another new park located adjacent to Route 17 in Tappahannock. This project will provide access to Hoskins Creek. And the Hoskins Creek Park is totaling just under 7 acres in size, and the access road is less than 500 feet long, 4 foot wide, and the town will administer the project. And again, the town has asked for the maximum state allocation of $350,000. And there's a short or a little schematic showing this. You'll see there's an industrial access road just to the west of that. The proposal of the project is to abandon or to move that further up the road so they don't have conflicts between the two entrances. And with that, if there are no objections, I'll bring this to the board next month for action. Questions?
Questions?
Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Dodson?
Ms. Dudley, you said it's going to be locally administered. The town of Tappahannock's not that big. They hire outside people to help manage it?
They will likely, they will have to hire some outside folks to administer this project. And we'll take a look at that before they do to make sure they have adequate resources to do this. Pretty small project, pretty easy. So, except that the access is right on 17, so we'll have to keep an eye on that with the permit for the access for 17. But we'll help them out.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Sellers?
I believe they have hired somebody, so that project's part of a bigger concept there. They're looking for access grant money to build the road and to help gain access into Hoskins Creek, but they actually have an economic development plan that goes along with it right there in the area. So they're here, they can talk about it, and for the next meeting, I can see if I can get them to provide the picture of a more detailed graphic of what they're trying to do there.
Good.
So, I'm particularly looking forward to this project. I live right up the road, and I'm looking forward to the kayak access.
Mr. Stant, for your help, in 2014, this program was created. And in its foreword, it says, the General Assembly hereby declares it to be in the public interest that access roads and bikeways to public recreational areas and historical sites be provided by using funds obtained from motor fuel tax collections on motor fuel used for propelling boats and ships, and funds contained in the highway portion of the Transportation Trust Fund. So they've set aside a funding formula, and it's a road, so they've asked us to administer the program, and that's what we're doing. It's a good program.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Stamps, I was going to say, and some senator and some delegate got their project thrown into the budget process. That's how it works. Thank you.
I guess the commissioner doesn't have anything else to do, too.
It's holding us up on our trails work, okay? It's not, Mr. Merrill, I'm just teasing. But the truth is, I will tell you this, folks, which you get a pretty good close view here when you're sitting in this chair. We have an awful lot of work to do, and people are working really hard and really long. And I can assure you that they are focused on what they're supposed to be focused on, and we're moving it as expeditiously as is possible. And so I hear you. There is a volume, there's volume part of this as well. And we're just trying to do it as fast as we can while making really good decisions, by the way. That's what we don't want to do, is waste our, meaning the citizens' money. So we're careful. Having said that, Mr. Casper, it's particularly, we don't want to miss opportunities for leverage. We don't want to miss opportunity cost. We want to make sure that we take advantage of those things along the way, so I'm 100% with you on that.
Full agreement, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dudley. Next item's item 4, Smart Scale Project Cancellation. Ms. Pryor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I have
Welcome.
3 smart scale items for you. The first one is a cancellation of a bicycle accommodation project in the Hampton Roads District. Mr. Hall, the district engineer, is kind enough to join me here in case you have any questions that I'm unable to answer. By way of background, the Smart Scale policy does state that Smart Scale projects, once selected, can only be canceled by the board. The Route 31 bicycle accommodation project was submitted by Surrey County in round 3 of Smart Scale. The total original project cost was $9.6 million. It was fully funded with district grant funds. The original scope included 4 miles of a 5-foot wide shoulder improvements along Route 31 in Surrey County from the town of Surrey to the Jamestown Scotland Ferry. The project is VDOT administered. This is just a sketch of where the project is located in Surrey. This chart provides just a snapshot of the details related to the project in terms of the Smart Scale benefit and score. Again, the total cost was $9.6 million, fully funded with district grant funds, had a score of 1.8, and ranked 26 out of 32 projects in the Hampton Roads District in round 3. The current estimate is $15.6 million. The project is planned through a corridor with significant right-of-way and utility impacts, driving much of the cost increase. These costs were not fully anticipated in the original estimate in the application. The county did recently apply for, unsuccessfully, a raise grant through the new infrastructure bill to address that shortfall. Again, they were unsuccessful in that grant application. And so in November, the county requested that the board cancel the project. So I will be bringing to you a recommendation in January to cancel the project. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
Anybody have any questions? Let me say this. As a board member that's been here for a little bit of time, it was very frustrating to me to see, particularly the round 1s and the round 2s, where we were trying to get our legs under us and we didn't have everything quite figured out as well as we needed to. So we keep getting these projects coming back to us where there's not enough money to fund them. And it's not necessarily just because of inflation or really the situation changed. It's because we didn't know what we should have known and what we could have known at the time. So a lot of these ones we've tripped over going forward fall into that category. We are getting much better, which goes to sort of our experience and our learning. But this is one of those ones that you'd say, why didn't we, right? Why didn't we know that cost? And there may be a good reason. I don't want to pick on this one. It's just the one in front of us. The other thing I would say, and I'll continue to say this, is I think recreational access is important to the Commonwealth. I think trails are important to the Commonwealth. I think bicycles are important to the Commonwealth. I think pedestrians are important to the Commonwealth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But somehow we need to mix all those together and find the right cost benefit between all of them. And so in this case, it was a project that went from 9.6 to $15.6 million. And it was a bicycle accommodation, right? So we're going to spend $15 million on this bicycle accommodation. And I can't tell you, sitting here, is it worth it or not, right? How do we measure whether it's worth it or not? And so the more we can work towards that, I believe, the better off we are, because it's sort of hard to know, right? If you told me that 100,000 bicyclists were going to use that over a period of time, it would be a different analysis than 3,000 bicyclists were going to use it over a period of time. So those are all things, as we continue to mature in this process, I hope we'll do more of that to really get down to the benefits to the citizens that are paying for this versus what we charge them to do it. And that's, money's precious here. And we can take this $15 million and do something else for it that perhaps has a better return on investment or a better cost-benefit analysis. I don't know, and I'm not judging this project because I don't know it in detail, but it's illustrative to that point, I think, and so I'm making it again.
Mr. Secretary.
Sir.
Just
This reminds me of another one that's coming up on the agenda later, and have we changed our processes so we do fundamental or simple things like title work in advance or some engineering or geotech now so that we don't stumble upon like in this case, a water line that was, I would assume, there and in the land records before they started and applied for this thing?
Ms. Pryor, you want to speak to some of that, the evolution, I guess, of our sophistication?
Sure. We have enhanced our validation processes each round of Smart Scale. Seems like each round we figure out something new that we should have asked about that we didn't know. So depending on the project and the status of the project, some significant work may have already been done in terms of preliminary engineering. Some projects are just brand new. And so the information we might have comes from the applicant, comes from public records, other sources. We don't usually go out and do field work prior to having an actual project selected.
So the applicant doesn't have to come in with some minimums like I've done title work or some preliminary engineering in order to be considered by VDOT?
That's correct. They have to meet certain readiness requirements. For example, NEPA, planning studies, safety studies, that sort of thing. But no.
Not the other?
No.
No, it's getting there. Additional cost to do all that right up front.
Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Kaspertz?
Just a thought for context, I think. I happen to have been part of the first round of Smart Scale and the second, the third, the fourth. I always ask in meetings exactly what the trend is. Are we getting better? Are we improving the process? Are we being more thoughtful? Are we making less errors? I think in every one of those cases, I could say the answer definitively is yes. Given the speed with which the first round moved and the creation of the Smart Scale model and the complexities in taking that model and then conveying it to those who would be applying, I actually think the number of errors that have occurred is remarkably small. And I commend all those who were part of that process, most of whom aren't here now, for just exceptional work. So there will be errors. These are complex projects that we're dealing with. There'll be oversights, there'll be omissions. But I think we have to judge it from a standpoint of reasonableness, and I think we've done a remarkable job. VDOT, OIPI, and all of those who've been part of this process, I commend them for the excellent work that they've done.
Thank you.
And at the risk of not allowing Mr. Kaspertz to defend the legacy of the Smart Scale process, I also have participated in every round of Smart Scale. And again, it was a learning process, right? We were building the plane while we were flying it. And I think when you look at and I don't know how many billions of dollars of projects are in the pipeline, very, very few at the end of the day have returned to this board either for reconsideration, budget amendment, or cancellation. And I think it goes to the incredible effort and hard work of the VDOT team, providing technical assistance to the localities and others, and the thoughtfulness that was designed in the process. So I know that at times some of this may be alarming as macroeconomic circumstances have changed, and they're impacting everyone in the world and every business in the world. Trust me, I can tell you. But this program is actually one of the more efficient and well-managed programs that I've seen in any space. And I commend the team for that effort, and I know how much hard work goes on behind the scenes to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hall. Always nice to see you. The next item is so we canceled one. We're being asked to give some money to another. So we've got a budget increase request, item 5 on Route 15 and 360 roundabout.
Yes, thank you.
Berg District.
I will point
Mr.
out
Dodson.
that I also have the district engineer, Chris Winstead, here for the Lynchburg District to answer any questions that I'm unable to address for you. By way of background, the Smart Scale policy states that under certain conditions, if the scope or the budget of a Smart Scale project changes, board action is required to approve that. The Route 15 and 360 roundabout project was submitted by Charlotte County in round 2 of Smart Scale. The original project cost was $7.5 million. And the request, we funded to a reduced amount of $5.2 million because we anticipated some cost savings in design that we identified after the application was submitted and before the funding scenario was created. The original scope included construction of a roundabout at Route 15 and Route 360. The project is VDOT administered and is scheduled to go to advertisement this month. The project was approved last month by this board for inflation-based adjustment. If you recall, there were a series of smart scale projects I brought to you to cover based on current updated unit prices and inflation. The estimated budget increase still outstanding to go to advertisement is another $1.2 million. This shortfall is due to several factors. The design was modified slightly based on public feedback regarding the operation and safety of the proposed roundabout. We added an additional leg to that roundabout, which increased the cost and also the amount of pavement that needed to be removed. There was also some unanticipated mitigation required due to unsuitable soils. So the chart below shows the original application, the adjustment made in October, and the current proposed budget increase to up to $7.7 million, which is an increase of another $1.2 million. That revises the score to 8.5, and the rank slips just slightly from 4 out of 10 to 5 out of 10. We've currently spent about $1 million on the project.
Before you leave that, just make sure that you don't do what I did, which is when I read the first line in the previous, when we ran through this last week, it says proposed budget increase in the last column, and the first number says 7.7. And I read that to me, the budget increase was 7.7. But of course, that's not what she's saying. So the budget increase we're asking here is 1.2 on top of a previous 1.2 for inflation, just to be clear.
There are sufficient district grant funds available to cover this cost increase. So I will be bringing back to you an action item next month for an additional $1.2 million in Lynchburg district grant funds for this project. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Secretary, I will say again, we're taking the money out of our district grant funds, so it doesn't affect the entire Commonwealth.
Just affects that district.
Sir.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Winstead. Next item is item 6, another smart scale budget increase for the Southern Connector in Stanton District. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. I will point out that I have Todd Stevens here. He's the new district engineer for the Stanton District. Hopefully between the two of us, we can address any questions you have on this project. Again, by way of background, just a reminder of the board policy related to cost increases on smart scale projects. The Southern Connector project was submitted by the City of Waynesboro in round 1. So if you recall all the nice things Mr. Kaspowitz and Mr. Brown just said about how much we've improved since round 1, just keep that in mind. The total original project cost was $16 million. The smart scale request was 12.6, and it was funded with district grant funds. The original scope included construction of a 1.5-mile 2-lane roadway located just south of I-64 between exits 94 and 96. The project is VDOT administered and scheduled for advertisement in December. This is just a location of the project there along I-64. So the smart scale budget increase required to go to advertisement is an additional $5.6 million. This represents an increase of 44%. There are several factors contributing to this cost increase. There are significant earthwork requirements due to results of the geotechnical investigation, additional box culvert quantities and costs to minimize the impacts to the floodplain. We also underestimated the stormwater management costs associated with the project, higher than anticipated utility relocation costs, and then updated unit costs and inflation based on today's costs. The City of Waynesboro has provided an additional $1.3 million for the project. In addition, the district has worked extensively with the city to modify the scope to attempt to bring it back in line with the budget. We removed the Delphine Avenue turn lane improvements, as well as the roundabout at Lyndhurst. We significantly reduced improvements at North Oak Lane, and also the shoulder width and required earthwork. The chart on the slide shows the change from the original application to the current situation. The expected cost right now is $23 million. This would increase the district grant budget to $18.2 million. The leverage funding has increased from $3.5 to $4.8 million. The score is reduced from 1.8 to 1.2. The rank of the project does not change within the cohort of projects. And to date, we've spent $4.8 million.
Mr. Stant.
Question. We're doing this increase now right before we go to bid, advertising for bid. If, for instance, the bid came in $2 million more than we thought it would be, are they going to come? Will they come back to us? I mean, how does that work? I'm not familiar with the process.
You'll see me again if the bids come in high.
They wouldn't have to come back. City could come up with it, right? Or they could come back. I mean, that's sort of the more important, if you continue, because I want to point out some stuff in the next slide.
I will be bringing an action to you in January to cover this cost increase. I will point out that the existing district grant balance entry of surplus funds from previous projects is insufficient to fully fund this shortfall currently. So part of the funding for the shortfall will have to come from balances available for round 5. District grant balances available for round 5. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
First, I want to congratulate Mr. Stevens on his new appointment. Look forward to working with him. He has big shoes to fill after Randy Kaiser's tenure, so welcome, Todd. I spent some time...
Put him through his paces right now. Sure. Let's get going.
Yeah, sorry.
Kim moved away. Did you see that?
I did spend some time talking with Randy Kaiser about this, and I did have expressed to him 2 concerns. One was the magnitude of the increase. And actually, there are 3. Number 1. Number 2, tapping into future allocations is concerning to me, that we're already committing money that could go to projects that may score much higher. And the third, which I'll ask Mr. Laird if he might be able to comment, I could not get an answer about what economic activity was scheduled for that corridor. I mean, it's a nice roadway there, and it's parallel to 66, but I haven't been able to find out, does Waynesboro have companies that are preparing to expand, to invest there, to put facilities in there? Those are my 3 concerns, and I would prefer to see, if we approve this next month, I'd prefer to see that Waynesboro have to come up with the delta as opposed to taking from future round 5.
Mr. Merrill, let me jump in here before we hear from our district. I think those are excellent points, and it concerns me as well. An additional one, and listen, smart scale is really good. Don't get me wrong. So
I'm not being critical of the process.
Yeah, so we're nipping around the edges of how to make it better. Right. To Mr. Brown's and Mr. Kaspritz's earlier points. But you see a project whose score goes down from 1.8 to 1.2. Those future things that might occur there, even if they're planned but not actual yet, would not affect this scoring, right? So it's not in the system, which is one of the things that troubles some of us about smart scale. It's because it can't look 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead. It looks at today, right? And so if we knew, for example, that by definition in 2 years a company was going to drop 8,000 people on that corridor and build a huge plant, that would not have an impact on its score, right? So that raises an obvious concern. And because the scoring is relative, right, your point about we're taking funds from future projects, it may score much better, but we can't compare them, right? Because it's relative. So the only thing we can compare this project to are the projects we scored it against. That's the way that it works. So the next round, those scores don't correlate to these scores, and there's no way in our system to say, well, we should have done something else later because it gave us a much better return. So that's another piece of this that sort of bothers me as a practitioner, right? How do we get to the absolute sort of value or return or payoff to the Commonwealth, to the district, et cetera? So all those things are sort of in the background of this, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. So one of my goals is to sort of nibble around these and try to change some of this as we go forward, and we're working on that, Mr. Merrill. But I think your points are spot on. Sir, welcome to the party.
Thank you so much. I did have a conversation with the assistant city manager yesterday to get an update on their plans for developing this industrial area. And they actually have a meeting today with the Virginia Business Ready Sites Program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, seeking a grant to start on-site utility construction, basically water and sewer. And the timetable is in conjunction with the building of the roadway, which we hope to start in the springtime.
And I'll tell you that there is a committee in the administration whose job is to vet this investment, these investments. And I serve on that committee as part of the team that looks at business-ready sites and tries to figure out which ones have the best potential to return value to the Commonwealth. So there's a connection between this board and that process. And I serve as a bridge for y'all to sort of try to get some input into that, try to keep us together.
Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Laird.
As I understand it, this is a connector road between two industrial sites, or potential industrial sites. Connection portion, or that portion.
Mr. Laird, can you use your mic, please?
Connection portion runs through Coiner Springs, a park. So that whole area is not necessarily going to be developed. So we're building a road in between two industrial sites. I'm not sure for what purpose. But my concern here, and I agree with my colleague, Mr. Merrill, that we are dipping into funds that could be allocated to potentially better projects. I would not question this whatsoever if it had to do with safety or with congestion. But it has to do with neither. It is economic, and if it's economic, I think that 2.7 shortfall should be, we're willing to pick up the amount that we have in excess in that general fund, but the shortfall should be the responsibility of the cities.
You know, and we might, this is, never like sort of just throwing things out when you haven't worked all the details through and thought it through well, but it does concern me, particularly the piece of getting into the next round, but not being accountable to the next round, right? It got its scoring out of a different round, and it said we'll do it on for relative reasons within that round. Now we're saying, oh, well, let's go get some money from a yet-to-be-competed round. We're not going to compete it in that round. We're not going to compete part of it in that round. We're not going to separate it and say, how does that, fare up to the other ones? We're just going to go grab it and put it in here and say we're going to fund it. And that may be the right decision. The process makes me a little uneasy because you could get bad decisions out of it. So I don't know exactly the way to get past that in terms of a process, but it's uniquely identified by this. And how do we sort of true it up? If we're going to get monies out of another round, how do we true up sort of the score to say, does it compete or not? Or do we even try to do that? In this case, we're not trying to do that because we don't have a mechanism to do it.
Mr. Secretary?
Sir,
Is
Mr.
it-
Lawson.
Is it possible that the way to skin this thing is to evaluate it in the new round? Because an argument could be that this is an entirely different project because of site conditions and things that I understand from the earlier answers, they weren't available, weren't known. Work it backwards. If they were known, would this thing have been approved? Because it clearly wasn't approved under those conditions, but I'll throw it out to your, I don't understand
It
smart scale.
It would have been approved under, would have been partially funded under the previous round. Given the score that it ultimately got because of the new money, it would have been funded. It went to number 15 out of 18. That's where it was before. So yes, this project would have been funded, but it wouldn't have been fully funded because it wouldn't have been enough money, right? So, I mean, to your point, even if there had been enough money, let's say right on the button, that's how much money they had left, and it would have been fully funded, that still doesn't obviate the concern about the relativeness versus the next rounds, and that's just something we live with every round. You know, it stands on its own. So that's, yeah, I struggle with it. I struggle with it. There's a process, and I'm not commenting specifically on this one, but as a process, I struggle with that. Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Secretary, when was this project originally applied for? Original application, what's the date?
Around one application, so it would have been submitted in 2016.
2016, okay.
On one, yeah. Ms. Sellers.
Can we wait to act on this to see what happens with the grant for the utilities or whatever that grant is that the city's going for?
Oh, yeah. We're not voting today. Let's make that clear. This is a workshop item, and we're not going to advance it to the action agenda today, so we do have a little bit of time. But, Ms. Pryor.
The only caution I would provide is that the project is scheduled to go to ad this month. It's going to be delayed until at least January until this board acts on the cost increase. A further delay is likely just to increase the cost more. And so that's kind of the balancing act that we have before us.
And, you know, my thought process behind this is they're probably going, and I don't know, but they're probably going for that industrial park there at exit 96, I think. And, you know, being a little familiar with the land use processes at the local level, once they have that and they start to get some interest from an industrial applicant, they may change the scope of that project, and it could give us a whole different idea of what they're trying to do. I mean, this is a major project if you look at it, and then one of the reductions in scope are the improvements along South Delphine Avenue or Road. And would they do that if a large industrial project comes? I don't know. I would be interested to see what the Virginia Economic Development.
So we wouldn't allow them to change the scope at this point. Once the project goes to advertisement, they wouldn't be able to modify the scope of the project.
And that's why I wanted to say, could we wait and see where it goes and see what they're trying to actually do at that site before, to make sure that the scope reductions that they've put forward make sense once we have a better idea of who's interested in that property.
So the answer is yes, you can do whatever you want. You're the board. I would caution that it's likely to drive the cost up more by delaying it.
Here's my suggestion, folks. Let us keep it in the process. We've got another month to work on it. We'll bring it back for an action item next month, would be the regular cadence. In the meantime, we'll try to work through some of these issues, see if there's some wiggle room in there with the with the city, et cetera, and update you before your vote at the action meeting to tell you where we are and what we recommend. Because, you know, it's sort of like cancel the project or finish the project. Is almost sort of where we are. Mr. Stant.
Excuse me, can we cancel a project?
Well,
Does this board have the authority to do that?
we're the only person that can do
Yes.
it.
Yes, the
Mr.
board
Lawson's
could-
dying to tell me something I'm not doing right.
On our own motion as opposed to when the city comes in and tells us to cancel.
Once we've funded it to this level, can we withdraw it if we want? Could we change our decision?
If you fund the increase, could you
No.
change your decision later?
No. Could we change the decision we've already made?
Could you cancel the project? Yes, you could, and $4.8 million would have to be repaid.
By the city of Waynesboro.
Yeah.
By some combination of the department and the city, yes.
Because that's the expenditure to date. So it's complicated. Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, not to further complicate the situation, I just wanted to just point out, you know, to your concern about having to fund, you know, a prior round project out of new funds, you know, that is established kind of as the board policy, not just for projects like this, but for any project for which may have a cost increase. So, you know, you have to take care of what we already have planned before we move forward. So I just wanted to point that out, as if this was just due to a simple cost increase, this would be the normal course of action.
We vote on it. It's not an automatic.
Anyone else? So the plan is, let us work it. Just come back for the action item. We'll give you an update next month. The recommendation. The board can do in the meantime, or the board can do then when it chooses to do that. And in the meantime, we can socialize it, talk to the commissioner or Kim or others, and try to get it to a place. I mean, we want to do good work, right? Whatever that means. That's what we want to do. We want to make good decisions and do good work. So we want to be thoughtful and make the best decision we can given where we are.
Secretary, real quick, I will say as a former local elected official, the smart scale process or Carlos and my good friend over next to him were saying, it's great to have the political process, the governors, the state senators, the influencers of the past to be away from the decision making. I know locally we've had projects when I was on city council years ago in Lynchburg were jumped up by former governors and and state senators, and by doing this process, it takes the political image, political, you know, I can't say
Takes the
nice
politics
words.
out.
Yeah, it takes, I could say something, but there's a mixed crowd here. So what I'm trying to say is that we won't get taken advantage of. Okay, that's a good word to use.
Thousands of people across the Commonwealth watching you.
Well, then I can really talk, okay? But it's a great process. It's a tremendous process.
I think there's no question to Mr. Brown, Mr. Kaspertz. I was actually here when the process began for a short period of time, but it was before we got into really the nuts and bolts. They had to figure that all out as they went forward, and it's much better than the process we had before.
Much
better. All right? Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Bridge.
If I might, while I have Todd at the podium, just for 1 second, and if I can indulge you and the members of the board for a proper introduction of Todd Stevens, who's our new district engineer for the Stanton District. He is a graduate of Virginia Tech and started in, I'm sorry?
Go Hokies.
Yeah.
Carolina.
He brings to us 34 years of experience in highway design and project management. And believe it or not, he did start his career with the agency back in 1988 as an engineer trainee in his served time here in the central office, Fredericksburg in Northern Virginia. Then he transitioned his work to become an assistant resident engineer in the Stanton District in the Verona residency. He did take a hiatus into the private sector from 1998 to 2004 when he rejoined us. Very fortunate to have him rejoin us as the area construction engineer and then promoted, I believe, in 2011 to the district construction engineer up until his promotion, I think, Tuesday, or last Tuesday, I believe.
Happy birthday.
Exactly.
Happy anniversary, I should say. Your 1 week anniversary.
But officially, yesterday was when I was announced to the
Okay.
world. I have been in an acting capacity, but so.
Did they change your pay? That's all I want to know.
But I do look forward. I'm sorry that my first appearance was not of a completely positive nature. But,
Oh, it's great.
I will certainly work to answer all the questions and try to move this project forward. I mean, time really is this project's worst enemy at this point. And so anything that I can do to, make my members feel better about it, please let me know.
We have some work to do between now and the next meeting, so.
Sounds like it. All right. But
Welcome
thank you so
aboard.
much for the
Thank you.
welcome, and sounds like I'll see you next month.
You will.
Mentioned that he was also a dapper dresser. Trying to take after the commissioner, I think. Everybody good with where we are on that? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a rail industrial access for Hershey Chocolate of Virginia. Mr. Mike Todd. Sir. Good afternoon.
Members of the
Let's talk
board.
chocolate.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm presenting another rail industrial access application today. For those I haven't met, my name is Michael Todd. I'm the director of the rail programs at DRPT. And so today I am presenting a project from that Hershey, Hershey of Virginia in Augusta County. And this is actually, for the most part, they are increasing their rail footprint to bring in raw materials. So in this case, it's cooking oil and peanuts and sugar and such. But kind of uniquely, there is an outbound element to this project as well, which is great.
Is the outbound, should we go make I think probably a site visit would be in order on Reese's Day, a Reese's Pieces Day, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Todd.
So the request is for $450,000. That's out of $5 million for the construction of the rail infrastructure. Hershey's is also making an investment in the facility itself. The total investment, which includes that $5 million, is a $140 million investment in their facility. So it's a significant expansion. Specifically for the rail, they're building close to just under a mile of rail. And it is not changing. There we go. So to take a look at it, the yellow lines here, so they do have existing rail service today. They do ship a little over 1,000 rail carloads a year. They're building the additional tracks in the yellow that you see. So they're putting in a couple of switches to basically create a new stack so that they can build trains and push them out onto the main line. The benefits for this project is a little over a 10% increase in their rail traffic, so it's 145 new carloads, a total of just over 1,300. Employment, they're adding 111 new jobs. They are part of an existing EDA, which is one of our application scoring criteria, but the Augusta County is actually below average in unemployment, so it's not considered a distressed locality, which is another thing we look at.
Mike, the EDA is not Authority. It's the economically distressed area. Is that what it is? What's EDA stand for?
I use EDA as Economic Development Area. It's just something that's been either designated by the local, regional authority or the state as, a focus for economic development. And then for the rail construction component, the $5 million, it's a 91%, private funding, 9%, the $450,000. So when you put that into our scoring criteria, they score the maximum number of points for the jobs, for essentially bringing a lot of private match to the table. So they get 10 points for the total investment and for the specifically for the rail investment. As I noted, they get 0 points for the local unemployment because it is not a distressed area, but they are in an economic development area, so they get 10 points, and 0 for short line. It is not on a short line, it's on NS's main line. And so today, as usual, this is not responding very well. Today, as usual, it's just consideration of the project in this workshop presentation. Next month, I'll bring a resolution to the board for adoption, and then after it's adopted, we'll execute the grant agreement and move forward with the construction.
Questions?
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir.
I would just like
Mr. Laird.
to commend Hershey and what they have done for the community and the jobs they have brought to the community. They're terrific corporate citizens, and they are spending a lot of money. This will make them the second largest facility for Hershey in the United States, one of 6. And it's a project that it will roast peanuts. They're integrating their processes more, and this is part of their strategy to increase their production, and I highly recommend them.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Todd.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir.
I did ask
Merrill.
Mr. Todd if there was a way that we could have Hershey's provide samples for the monthly CTD meetings for all the guests and for the board members.
Peanut-coated M&Ms, right? Peanut M&Ms. The next item on the agenda is item 8, the revised budget update. Mr. Burrell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm here today to give you a briefing on our revised fiscal year 23 budget. If you recall, Ms. Farmer presented to the board in September a revised Commonwealth Transportation Fund budget, and VDOT's budget was presented last month. This is our opportunity to catch up with those changes that you've already seen on the Commonwealth Transportation Fund side and the VDOT side. So just summarizing what she has already presented to you, this uplift represents an additional $3.9 million to the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. Those funds are distributed based on a formula that's established in the Code of Virginia, so there's no discretion on how those funds go to the sub-programs in the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. Because we are in cycle right now, we have applications pending, or our application cycle is open. For our transit programs, we are recommending that we hold much of this funding in reserve to address those applications through the update of the fiscal year 24 6-year improvement program. There are a couple of items that we are recommending going ahead and allocating now. Most importantly on this slide is the NVTC WMATA funding, which is allocated in accordance with the code. Again, that's not an area where the board has discretion, so that funding flows through us to NVTC. There's an additional $1.3 million that goes to the Commonwealth Rail Fund. Again, this is distributed based on formula that is in the code. For the freight programs that are administered by DRPT, again, we're going to recommend that we hold those in reserve because our FY24 application process is currently open. And for the passenger rail program, where 93% of that funding goes anyway, we would allocate that and transfer that funding to the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. The other change in the revenue side is a general fund commitment to transportation of $5 million for the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. That was reflected in the DRPT budget that was adopted in June, but I'm mentioning it because Ms. Farmer included it in her update in September, and Mr. Sparks will give you a presentation next with our recommendation of how that funding gets allocated to eligible projects. Clicker's not working. Ah, there we go. So to talk about how those revenues then flow through our updated budget and our 6-year improvement program, our budget reflects things a little differently from what you see with VDOT's budget. Our 6-year improvement program shows our allocations of funds based on our estimated revenues and the projects that have been approved by the board. Our agency budget is a little different. We allocate our funding based on projected spending, so it is a cash forecast, and we forecast individually all over 2,000 projects that are in our program each year. So as we prepare that cash flow forecast for each project, or when we add new projects to the program, we revise our budget accordingly. So the next couple of slides aren't going to line up exactly with those revenues that I've just had on the previous slide. In terms of our budget, we do see a $6.3 million increase in our public transportation programs. That reflects the spending that was on associated with the uplift, but also some changes to the 6-year improvement program, and $1.2 million in payments to VPRA. And again, that has an asterisk that is driven by the formula that's in the Code of Virginia. On the public transportation side specifically, this slide shows where the increase lies. Mr. Sparks is going to come up after me and give you an update on some changes, recommended changes for our 6-year improvement program that include the allocation of some additional funding out of our deobligated balances for capital projects, and also the allocation of funding out of the transit ridership incentive program. So that, added to the NVTC WMATA transfer that is required by code, gets us to the $6.3 million change in our budget that you'll have before you today. This item is on your action agenda today to allow us to catch up again with the actions that you've already taken for the Commonwealth Transportation Fund budget and for VDOT's budget. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Burrell?
Sienna?
Well done, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
As promised, item number 9 is the 6-year plan update from Mr. Sparks. Welcome, Mr. Sparks.
Afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. So this month we have some new projects that DRPT is recommending to add to the SIP, and we also have a handful of funding transfers for your consideration. Starting off with the new projects, the first set of projects that we're recommending for inclusion in the SIP comes through our Transit Ridership Incentive Program. TRIP was created as part of the Transportation Omnibus Bill in 2020. This legislation calls out 2 distinct program goals. Those goals being the first, the establishment of transit routes of regional significance and some support improvements to regional transit service. We call this the Regional Connectivity Subprogram. The second program goal being the establishment of programs to reduce the impact of fares on low-income populations, and we refer to this as the Zero Fare Subprogram. TRIP is guided by CTB policy, which was adopted by the board last July, and the program is managed by Lauren Magnato, who is here in the audience today. And then the last bullet point here, Director DeBrule mentioned this in her presentation, but earlier this year, the General Assembly passed some legislation to allocate an additional $5 million in state funding to TRIP, specifically for regional connectivity projects, which prompted us to open a mid-cycle grant opportunity for new TRIP projects. So through our mid-cycle solicitation, we did receive 4 TRIP applications. Those are listed here on the screen. The first one from Radford Transit for some service improvements and expansions to their Route 4041, which connects Radford to Christiansburg and Blacksburg. The second application came through the Northern Shenandoah Valley Regional Commission, NSVRC, for their RideSmart service. This would be new service that connects Front Royal to Gainesville. The third application came from the Greater Richmond Transit Company, or GRTC. They came in for a package of microtransit projects So these were new services and microtransit zones in Henrico, Chesterfield, Powhatan, New Kent, and Ashland. And then the fourth application came from Loudoun County Transit. They also came in for a package. Theirs were for new transit services to connect to the new Silver Line metro stations in Ashburn, the Loudoun Gateway metro station, as well as Dulles International Airport. So I guess the TRIP program offers multi-year grants. That's one thing I wanted you all to be aware of, which phase out the state's funding percentage each year. So out of the 4 applications that we received, a total of $8.8 million in state funding was requested for year 1. And then over the course of the full 5-year period, a total of $22.7 million in state funds were requested. So per the CTB policy for TRIP, applications were evaluated and scored using criteria that includes congestion mitigation, ridership, regional connectivity and collaboration, and cost per passenger. For this mid-cycle program, DRPT is recommending funding for 3 of those 4 projects, and 2 of the 3 are a scaled-back version of the original request. So you can see here on this slide, those 2 scaled-back projects would be the GRTC microtransit project, as well as the Loudoun County fixed route service expansion project to connect to the Silver Line. We are recommending full funding for Radford Transit, which is the first one listed on the screen. So then, in addition to the TRIP projects, we're recommending the inclusion of 3 new transit capital projects to the SIP, all of which are coming from Fredericksburg Regional Transit. This is more of an administrative modification. Fred has requested to rescope a portion of the Merit Capital Grant that the board approved in June. The initial grant was for spare parts, but Fred would like to repurpose roughly $30,000 of that grant to replace a service truck, purchase an expansion service vehicle, and then purchase some shop equipment. As indicated in the notes here on this slide, the total state funding would not change with this by adding these new projects. Since these are technically new projects, the board must approve them before they can be added to the SIP. So no change to the total state impact. Those were the new projects, and now I'm going to move along to the funding transfers.
Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Merrill.
Yeah, just 2 questions, thank you. Can you comment why the transit from Front Royal to Gainesville did so poorly? As you know, with the 66 widening all the way out to Gainesville and Haymarket, there's a lot of growth out in the Front Royal area, and I'm just curious because I'm sure I'll get asked, what happened with their project.
Yeah, we did work closely with NSVRC on their application. We thought it was a decent concept. The ridership potential was not great due to the fact that the service that would start in Front Royal didn't go all the way into the district. The idea here was that it would start in Front Royal, make a connection in Gainesville, hook up with PRTC, and then folks would be able to go into the district. We thought that transfer, it wouldn't be a 1-seat ride, and we would lose some potential ridership with that. So we're still interested in this service, but we wanted to go back to NSVRC and tell them about our concerns and work with them on a better application next time.
Thank you.
So now to the funding transfers. So the transit projects that DRPT is recommending funding transfers for have experienced some significant cost increases. Starting with transit operations and vehicles, the graphic on this slide shows that bus price increases on our state bus contract have significantly gone up just within the last year. As you can see here, small transit bus costs have gone up 79%, while the battery electric bus and large buses have gone up 36% and 27% respectively. In addition to the vehicles themselves, The transit industry is experiencing wage cost increases for drivers and mechanics. Fuel prices have gone up significantly, and bus driver employment has sustained some pretty significant losses as a result of the pandemic. On top of all of those increases, the industry is also experiencing some long delays in the manufacturing and delivery of buses, which before the pandemic was only 6 months for the smaller vehicles, smaller transit vehicles, and is now estimated at roughly 3 years due to ongoing supply chain issues and an increased competition for chassis with private delivery services such as Amazon. Vertical construction costs have also increased significantly. This graphic is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which shows that both bid prices and input costs for non-residential construction have increased. I won't go into a whole lot of detail here since I know the board received a presentation on construction cost increases at the last board meeting, but the same factors are influencing transit construction costs. Increased costs for materials. We see an increase in costs for skilled labor, for trucking, for shipping, and also increased competition. This month we have 5 projects that we're recommending funding adjustments for. The first 3 here on the screen are to address vehicle cost increases out of our 5310 program, which is a federally funded program with no state match. And the last 2 here on the list are construction cost increases for a couple transit facility projects that have both been on our books for a while and continue to experience a funding gap. Additional funding for these last 2 projects will come from our deobligated transit capital carryover balance for FY23. And I should also mention that we have on these final 2 projects, we have rescored them in our capital prioritization process, and we found that there's no material change that would have impacted the funding decisions.
And if I can chime in on that, I much like the conversation about the project in Stanton District, we've really looked very long and hard at these 2 facility projects for Blacksburg and Williamsburg. We've sent our chief engineer, our engineering team in and really picked apart these projects from a scope, schedule, and budget perspective to make sure that we're making the right recommendation to you. I've been with DRPT for 6 years. I can count on one hand how many cost increases we've brought to you as out of cycle or out of a grant application process. These projects are ready to go, and we will continue to chase them if we don't find a way to either move them forward or figure out how to resolve them. We have looked at scope changes. Both agencies have sought relief from the Federal Transit Administration through their discretionary programs. So we are at the point with these projects where I think the most sound recommendation is to bring them to you, use our deobligated balances to fund them out so that they both can go and be advertised in the next few months for construction. In both cases, while the description says admin and maintenance facility, these are maintenance facilities that help these agencies keep their vehicles in a state of good repair and keep their systems running well. They're both growing agencies where we've seen growth in ridership. They're very productive agencies, and so it is my recommendation to you that we move these 2 projects forward as part of this adjustment that we're bringing to you today.
I have a question. What is a human service vehicle?
That is technically the FTA 5310 program is human service transportation. It's for disabled populations and for seniors specifically, so you have to be pre-qualified.
Those are the systems that we're seeing the 80% cost increase on the vehicles. And those vehicles typically have a 4-year useful life, and it's taking us upwards. We're anticipating 3 years to get those vehicles replaced. So we're looking at having to run vehicles almost twice their useful life at a cost that's 80% greater than what we've seen in the past. So, I mean, these are real challenges for vulnerable populations.
Is it funded through Medicare?
No, FTA Section 5310 is a carve-out specifically for seniors and individuals with disabilities. It has nothing to do with Medicare.
It's not I think you might be thinking it's transportation to medical stuff.
Right.
It's just transportation in general, right? Which is why it's not health-based, if you will. I'll tell you, we asked a lot of questions, and we struggle with this. We're struggling with transit I'm struggling with transit in general, not because I don't think it's a good thing and we need it, but because I don't know where it's ending up. VRE, which I was just talking to the director about, has been crushed and continues to stay crushed. And, obviously Metro, we know a lot about Metro as well. And so where is this all going to end? What are we going to look like 4 or 5 years from now? If we knew that, it would be a heck of a lot easier. But we don't. And we'll speak to some of that in upcoming months. But, we've got a lot of money going into these programs, and we need to make sure that that money's well spent and that ridership returns. In VRE's case, I think I saw an article yesterday, Jennifer, that said like 11% of the peak demand seats are filled. 11%. That's not so good when it used to be people coming out the windows, right? Holding on for dear life, trying to get on the car. So, I don't know where we're going to end up, but one of the things we're talking about and trying to understand is how can we not spend money in the interim that may not be a good expenditure while we're waiting for this to settle out? And yet, if you don't have a maintenance facility that can keep your stuff going, what do you do there? So it's just, we're in this terrible time of between the pandemic and the supply chain and inflation, we just don't know where we are. Or better said, we don't know where we're going to be. And so it really gets hard. And so I've asked questions like, well, can we delay? Can we delay just to see what's going to happen? Yeah. And Jennifer would say, well, we're twice our useful life at this point. And, will the prices on those vehicles come down, right? Can't afford them now, do you wait? And hope they come down 25 or 30% the next year. And was it worth the wait? So, not knowing and not having a really good ability to predict is really troublesome. And we're committed to keep the system alive and working. At the same time, we don't want to spend money that's not going to be, in retrospect, well spent. And it's just it's a hard place to be because you just don't know what you don't know. So, fair enough. We're working through it.
It's fair enough. It's like trying to change the tire on a bus as it drives down the interstate, and
you don't know where the bus is going to go or where it's going to stop.
Exactly. And I think we are doing our due diligence, working with our partner agencies and making sure that we fulfill the fiduciary responsibility that the Commonwealth has placed in the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to bring you well-reasoned recommendations. We have a portfolio of projects that are going to struggle with inflation, and we're going to take them as they come and pick them apart and make sure it's the right investment for the Commonwealth to make at the right time to bring you a recommendation. And so with that being said, with the slate of projects that we have and the modifications to the program that we're bringing to you today, we have done that. Our partners will tell you we ask very hard questions. We've had some very uncomfortable conversations on these two facility projects in particular, and that's gotten us to where we are today.
Mr. Secretary?
Sir, Mr. Merrill.
I agree with what you just said, the uncertainty, but what Mr. Brule said, the investment in the maintenance facility seems like it's going to be increasingly critical to maintain the existing fleet, because if it's going to take us 2 to 4 years to get new vehicles, maintaining what we have is going to be essential, or we will not have a program.
It is, but of course, Mr. Merrill, to be devil's advocate, we're building this maintenance facility for 25 years? 40 years?
40 years is the useful life of a facility.
So we know right now we need it, right? And we know, given sort of where we've been, that we need it. The question is, in 10 years from now, what's it gonna look like, because we're making these long-term bets. It's no different than these highway projects we get into in the public-private world, where they're 50-year terms, right? Wow, 50 years. So we're really gonna be doing it like we do it now, 50 years from now? Is it gonna be the same, you know, we're gonna go down the road the same way and
The
same
good news-
volumes and all that? So it's,
But it could be redeployed for school buses or things like that, so it's not like it's a sunk cost that could never be utilized.
perhaps, yeah. My only point is we're in changing times, radically changing times, and I don't think we really know where we're going to end up. So Jennifer's the perfect person, Director DeBurle's the perfect person, because I promise you she asks really hard questions, and she's not an easy make to just get money out of her. She's going to ask you really hard questions, and she's going to guard our money just like it was her own, because that's how she is. So it's really good we have her there. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Sparks. Thanks, Mr. Brule. The item number 10 is a Smart Scale Round 5 screening and validation. Ms. Brooke Jackson. Hello,
Hi.
Brooke.
Good afternoon, Mr.
Welcome.
Secretary. Thank you. So I'm here to give the last update from Smart Scale on screening and validation before the staff recommended funding scenario is delivered at the January CTB meeting. So this is our screening results. So first, as a reminder of where we are on the timeline to date, we are in the September to December one, which is fully involved in scoring right now. We have completed our screening process, and I'm going to go over the results of our screening review, and 393 applications will advance to scoring this round. That's not considering the CTB applications if they are adopted this month. Cost estimate validation is winding down, and that should be done before January for the full run of the scoring scenario. And all of the major screening items have been made. This table was provided in the October CTB meeting. The numbers that are given here are the values that were submitted as of August. A validation process is heavily underway still on those cost estimates. Like I said, they are winding down right now. So these numbers will change when I come to you in January. And these numbers have been reduced by the screening, and I will show you the results of that coming up. As a reminder, our screening decisions, these were covered last month, but this serves as a reminder that we're implementing CTB policy, screening for meeting a V-Trans need, readiness, and eligibility. Most of the projects you'll see on the list, they were screened out for readiness this round, and not as much on the eligibility and V-Trans need side. Each round, we raise the bar for readiness in hopes of reducing the project changes that come to y'all. I know you had a discussion about that earlier. So we are raising the bar every round to reduce scope and estimate changes, and that is no exception to this round. And we tried to deliver comments and feedback in a very timely manner this time to get applicants more ready and more eligible for the entire process. The other reminder is that the more complex the project is in scope and estimate, the more that we ask of the applicant to provide to us to make sure the readiness requirements are met. So what improvements did we make between round 4 and round 5? So this round in October of 2021, VDOT's IID division helped roll out the pre-scoping application. And this is in our SMART portal. The SMART portal is the public-facing application system that we use. And a pre-scoping module opened up a year-round application. So an applicant can get into the portal and type their ideas for a scope of a project that they're interested in or that they've developed or worked on a planning study. And that lets the state know that they have this project in mind, and they can start working with the state on a general application. It isn't assigned to any of the programs, but it can be imported into any of the funding programs, and they are listed there. Those are all of the programs that are available in the SMART portal. So this is supposed to help communication between the state and the applicant and make sure that applications are more ready. So I think we'll see the fruits of that more in the coming rounds, is using this module to improve. We did see a lot of applicants start their pre-application in the pre-scoping module this round, which was a huge help, and we got a lot of positive feedback from the districts using that module. The second thing we did this round was make some additional enhancements in the pre-applications. Applicants received real-time readiness warnings quoting the technical guide, and the technical guide outlines what CTB policy is for the Smart Scale program. So we gave snippets of information telling them what the readiness and eligibility requirements were for any particular component they would enter into the system. So if they said they were doing a new interchange, a warning would pop up saying what the technical guidelines would be for that component. And at that point, after submission, we had over 100 applications that still had serious issues. And what we're going to go over is a lot of the work that was done between the districts and the applicants, and also DRPT as well, so VDOT and DRPT, and the work that was done to reduce these serious issues that were happening on applications from 100 to less than 15. Additionally, on the screening side, this round we used mapping to identify application overlap with previously funded Smart Scale projects, and this is one of the eligibility categories. So if previously funded Smart Scale projects were in the exact same scoping area, you cannot be asking for the same V-Trans need. And so we were able to identify those issues early on and either have them come to a scoping change for their Smart Scale project or a change in their application to make sure it did not conflict with a previously funded project. And a lot of this was done in that June timeframe. Applicants received this feedback June 1st, and they were able to work on their applications for the August 1st submission. So here are the screen out decisions by round. Even with raising the bar for readiness round over round, we have consistently stayed at less than 5% of screen out decisions round over round, and we have mostly, for the most part, we're right in the same range right now, reduced the amount of screen out decisions every round while still raising the bar. And this is a reflection of applicants understanding the process and VDOT and DRPT staff working very closely with applicants to get the applications ready and eligible. And here is the list of the screen outs for the round 5 fiscal year 2024 application cycle. This round, projects were screened out for readiness and eligibility and not V-Trans needs. Those screening decisions were mostly made at the pre-application timeframe. 6 projects were screened out for not meeting a V-Trans need, and I presented on that in the October CTB meeting. But all of the full applications were determined to meet a V-Trans need. And the readiness items that you will see is mostly not meeting those feature requirements, those bars that I was saying. If you're asking for more, making sure that you're far enough along in your document development so that your scoping items won't change in the future. So additionally, we had a list of applicants' withdrawn applications. These could be anything from political support lost. They didn't want to keep developing the application due to readiness and eligibility comments received from us. They didn't think they could overcome them, or other development issues that they've had with it. If they found other funding for the project, they might withdraw the application. So from now through January, we're going to finalize these screening decisions, which we brought here, finish our validation, mostly focused on cost estimate validation, scoring, finishing that up over the next month, and we'll come back to you with our staff recommended funding scenario at the January CTB meeting. And with that,
anybody have any questions for Ms. Jackson?
Questions?
Good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to them about the scoring these things and some of the stuff that we do. And Steve, did you tell me computers run for a week, 10 days? we've got these, like, we do our own scoring, right? And we've got these, like, and maybe that's not the right word, called supercomputers, but we've got these supercomputers. And the algorithm is really complicated. It does all the scoring. When we put the data in, this thing runs for days and days and days and days before it spits out an answer. And if you stop it, you got to start all over again, right? So this is I mean, to Mr. Kasperitz's and Mr. Brown's comments earlier, this is a really strong program we have. It's not, people don't do this everywhere, and they don't do their own scoring like we do, and it's pretty sophisticated. It's pretty involved what they do, and so I don't want to lose sight of that as we critique around the edges of it. The corpus is darn good, right? We're just trying to make it a little bit better. So thank you, Ms. Jackson. Appreciate it.
Secretary.
Yes, sir, Ms. Kessler.
Yeah, just to comment, Brooke, on the trend on the screen out decisions is also very positive. I mean, the fact that we're down to 2 or 3%, that may be like unemployment. That's as low as it ever gets. So good job on that as well.
Reflection of applicants and staff working really closely together throughout this process, and it's a Herculean feat to get it done. So thank you.
As well, to get the numbers down to 13 from 100.
Yes.
That's a lot of work. I mean, it's one little bullet on the slide, right? And we sort of say it and move on, but it represents tremendous amounts of work.
We marked 17 projects considered ready for scoring at submission. So 17 out of 411. Even though there was 100 that had major issues, there was 300 that had minor issues that still weren't ready for scoring. So we've made a lot of strides in the past few months.
Work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Ms. Director, any comments?
Briefly, in your folders, you have a director's report. We had a very robust conversation about the director's report at the Rail and Transit Subcommittee meeting this morning, but I'll hit on a couple of highlights that follow up on the remarks that you just made, Mr. Secretary. We are still seeing transit ridership overall trending behind our pre-pandemic levels, but there is good news in the story. We crunch a lot of numbers and we look at a lot of data. Transit ridership rebounded in Virginia, a 56% increase in fiscal year 22 compared to the prior fiscal year. As we're tracking the first quarter of fiscal 23, we're up 29% for the first quarter of fiscal year 23 compared to the first fiscal quarter of 22. So we're continuing to see that slow, gradual uptick of folks returning to the office and returning to transit, and we're really pressing on our systems to be creative and innovative in adapting their services to meet new commuting paradigms. People don't travel the way that they did before the pandemic. And so the systems that we see doing the best are the ones that are changing how they provide service to meet the needs of their communities. On the Amtrak side, we've seen ridership hit all-time highs for Amtrak. Ridership grew by 37% in the month of September as compared to September of 2019. So that's 105,000 passengers in September of 2022 compared to 76,000 during the same month in 2019. So we're seeing great growth on the Amtrak side. We also celebrated the 5th anniversary of our Virginia Breeze state-supported intercity bus system December 1st, and our ridership there is also off the charts and exceeding expectations. So intercity travel is far exceeding where we were before the pandemic. I think we'll continue to see our transit systems adapt and overcome the situations that they have seen before them. I don't know that we'll return to pre-pandemic levels, but we're certainly continuing to move in the right direction on those things. We had a number of celebrations over the last month as well. In November, we celebrated the opening of the Silver Line with a huge event at Dulles Airport. Really encouraged by the numbers we're seeing out of the ridership on that line already. People are really looking for other ways to access the airport without having to get behind the wheel of a car, and so that's very positive. Just last Friday, HRT celebrated an opening of the Base Express in Norfolk. That is intended to unlock transit access to the Norfolk Naval Station, which is arguably, I believe, the largest employer in Hampton Roads. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention in terms of celebration, in the spirit of talking about Round 1 smart scale projects. We did celebrate a ribbon cutting for the Petersburg Multimodal Center and the Park and Ride. That was a Round 1 smart scale project that I think I've worked on since Round 1, and I was very happy to see that open for public use in November. So while we have a lot of challenges and we have a lot of work on our plates, we're seeing some bright spots in the work as well. And I have a number of members of my team here today sitting in the back. You guys are doing a fantastic job doing that, along with our new Chief of Public Transportation, Zach Trogdon, who's with us for his first board meeting today. So.
Want to stand him up and introduce him?
Yeah, stand up, Zach. So Zach joined us. He was formerly the... the commissioner was far more prepared than I was, so now I'm gonna wing it a little bit, Zach. He joined us from Williamsburg Area Transit Authority, where he's been the executive director for the past several years. Prior to that, Zach was the county administrator in Charles City County. Before that, he was a town manager in North Carolina. So I can tell you, he comes to us not only with some transit credentials, but great public administration credentials. And he's come in and I was his predecessor, and he's digging into stuff that I honestly never looked at over 6 years in the job. So I'm just really grateful to have one job off of my plate, and really grateful to have Zach on the team. Very thankful for Grant Sparks to have stepped up for way longer than he was promised to fill that role in an acting capacity, and he is very happy to have returned to his Director of Transit Planning job. So we've got a few other folks on staff back there today that just are here to get an experience of what it's like to be at the board. But grateful to have Zach here. We've got a few more things moving around on our end, but you're going to start seeing some new faces from the DRPT side over the next few months as well.
Zach, let me add our welcome from the board to you, and welcome to the party. Can we ask you about the facility in Williamsburg we're talking about, since you came from Williamsburg? I'm teasing. We won't get into that. We won't get into that. And Grant, Grant Sparks, let me add my appreciation to you stepping up and filling that role. You were really needed, and you did a fantastic job, and so we appreciate you. I know you're glad to be back where you are, but it was really important for us to have you help us, so thank you so much. Anything else, Mr. Director? You're good. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I started with 3 items for you today. We dispensed with Todd Stevens' announcement, which I think it will be a great opportunity for the Stanton District, especially as we go into the construction phase along Interstate 81. So I look forward to Todd's early baptism by fire coming back next month, as well with what we're going to do with the Waynesboro project. The second item that I had for you today, along with Jennifer announcing the Silver Line, we're happy to announce last Tuesday, the same time period, the opening of I-66 outside the Beltway, which represents 22.5 miles of express lanes, managed lanes through that corridor. And it's been a terrific ride since 2017, when this board took action to commence or finalize the deal, I think, in December of 2017. 2018, we started the design work, and we had the line of sight of December 1st of 2022 to open the facility, which we did ahead of schedule. So kudos to the Northern Virginia Mega Projects team and everyone that's involved with that. But I think that was a very successful event that we had last Tuesday.
Yeah, I think the ahead of schedule should have been emphasized. Nothing in this scope and scale of projects finishes ahead of schedule in these days. So superb job by all involved. It's really quite impressive. For anybody that lives in the area and watched this project progress, I've never seen quite as many pieces of equipment nor individuals working on a project over a 23-mile corridor continuously since the start. An amazing orchestration of, I think, over several hundred different contractors that were able to complete this job ahead of schedule. So my kudos to all involved. Exceptional work, and the project's being well used by my observation.
Very good. I might add that this was 22.5 miles with, at the height, 2,000 people working on the job on any given day, and we delivered this all during a global pandemic, so on time. So again, my kudos go out to the Northern Virginia staff, Susan Shaw, and particularly for being the project director on that, and you've seen Susan a number of times down in front of the board, so job well done. The final thing that I do have for you is the American Society of Civil Engineers today is going to announce its infrastructure report card here nationwide, but also here in Virginia, and I wanted to give you a quick update on where they're going to rate Virginia's roads and bridges. I'll start with the roads that in 2015, ASCE gave Virginia D on the roads. Today, they're raising that to a C-. Nationwide, it is a D overall for roads, so we are above the nationwide average. Bridges, in 2015, we were a C. That is being increased to a B. And so nationwide, we continue to see a C being the average for the nationwide. I think this, you know, as with any report card, I'd like A's and B's or A's, but where we are right now is continuing to trend upward. I do think that this reflects the hard work of the men and women of the department and their dedication to improving the infrastructure. But I also think that this is a direct reflection of the increase of funding that we've been dedicated back to, in particular, many of our assets. In 2019, the comprehensive review that really focused on pavements and bridges and our special structures. But to that fact, if we take a look at what we've been able to accomplish with Smart Scale and State of Good Repair program overall by the board, I think that is a tremendous investment that we've made over the last several years into our infrastructure with, as we've heard, more and better to come. So with that being said, I think you'll see some press coming out, whether it be today or sometime during this week. But again, our numbers continue to be able to be trending in the right direction, I'm proud to say. Secretary, that ends my comments.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Two brief comments, and then we're going to take a short break. To Steve and Jennifer's points, two huge projects delivered in last month. Both of them incredibly important. Jennifer got the honor, appropriately so, of speaking at the Silver Line opening. It was certainly more of her baby than the rest of us. So great job on that. I got to attend and be part of the ceremony as well, which was great. It was very full and exciting, lots of people there. Secretary of Transportation came from the United States, amongst other many dignitaries that were there. And then we rolled into 66, another huge, multi-billion-dollar project. Really cool. Mr. Kasparitz on time, or ahead of time. Really cool. Did not go without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way, I can tell you that. And it's not all over yet, but we'll work through all that. I thought it was unique in a way, and it's subtle, but I thought it was important. I came to this job, like many of my colleagues before me, not to do the job per se, but to serve the governor and to serve the Commonwealth. And a legislator was telling me yesterday when I was talking to him about when Whit Clement had the job, this legislator asked, Whit, what did you do to the governor that he made you take that job? Because they didn't have any money back then. And we're in a very different place in transportation in 2022 than we've historically been. And it's not just money, it's process, it's programs, it's smart scale, it's all sorts of stuff. So we've improved in the Commonwealth a lot since the time I've been involved, and since Scott's been involved, we've seen those changes. And it's remarkable, I would tell you that. And certainly even before us, go back 10 or 15 years, when there was lots of politics, as Bert alluded to, of what gets done where, how, by who, how much, and all that, which was not a good process for the Commonwealth. And so we're in a much better place today. But uniquely, the governor said at the 66, and you rarely hear this, he gave credit to the governors that came before him. He said, hey, I get to stand up here and cut the ribbon, but obviously I didn't start this project. And he named the previous governors that had been involved. And a number of people came up to me and remarked about it, because we all know how it works, right? whenever the ribbon's cut's the governor that's standing there at the time who gets the credit for the ribbon cutting. But, and we all know that that doesn't, you know, they don't get all the credit, but that's not the way the PR sort of works. But he made a point of mentioning the fact that there are a lot of other people along the way that made that project happen, and he got the honor of cutting the ribbon without doing all the work. And I just thought that was emblematic of how he is as a person and as a governor, and it was just nice to see. And I got a lot of remarks about it, so I thought it was interesting. With that, appreciate the opportunity to say a couple words, and we're going to take a very short break, 10 minutes, and we will be back for the action meeting at, let's call it 3:27.
Sir.
And I'm going to call to order the meeting, the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. The first item on the agenda today is public comment, and the first speaker is Mr. Phil North. Mr. North. Hold on a minute. Go ahead, Mr. North. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commonwealth Transportation Board members and Secretary Miller, Commissioner Britch, and Director DeBrew. My name is Phil North, and I currently serve as the chairman of the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission, the vice chairman of the Roanoke Valley Transportation Planning Organization, and chairman of the Virginia County's Transportation Steering Committee, and also serve on the Roanoke County Board of Supervisors in the Hollins District. I'm here today to speak about item 12 on your agenda, concerning a potential smart-scale application for Interstate 81 southbound between exit 137 and 128. I spoke to you folks in May during the Salem District Spring Public Hearing about this very section of interstate. As you're aware, Interstate 81 is critical to the economic vitality of the Commonwealth of Virginia, with the highest per capita truck volume in the state, carrying nearly 50% of the state's value of goods. Interstate 81 also experiences the highest degree of congestion, and combined, they result in the highest proportion of incident delay compared to all other Virginia interstates. Interstate 81 is the artery connecting the Roanoke Valley to the New River Valley and to Virginia Tech. In addition, serving as a preferred route for commuters and travelers, the interstate provides a connection to flights in and out of the Roanoke-Blacksburg Regional Airport, to 2 Amtrak trains each day, as well as to Virginia Tech's Blacksburg campus, to the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine in Roanoke, and to the Radford University Carilion facility in Roanoke as well. The SmartWay bus travels Interstate 81 daily to provide service between Roanoke and Blacksburg, and the Virginia Breeze bus also travels Interstate 81 daily between Washington, D.C. and Bristol, with stops at exit 140 Park and Ride, as well as the Falling Branch Park in Christiansburg. The segment of interstate you will be discussing today, southbound between exit 137 at Wildwood Road and exit 128 at Aranto, is where the truck climbing lanes begin. It is the only segment of the 32-mile-long interstate between Christiansburg and Troutville that is not currently funded for widening. But vitally important, this project was the first Interstate 81 corridor plan project to miss being funded in the original Interstate 81 project programming in 2020. The northbound segment between exit 118 in Christiansburg and exit 137 at Wildwood Road is currently in the design phase. As you know, there are great efficiencies and cost savings in designing and widening both directions of interstate at the same time. Further, delaying widening of the southbound segment for several years would only cause redesign, reconstruction, and increased driver disruption when this project is eventually programmed. I also wanted to bring to your attention the sobering crash history along this 7-mile segment of the interstate. There have been 251 crashes since 2018, for an average of 50 crashes per year, or about 1 crash per week. And sadly to say, 5 deaths have occurred in 4 crashes since only February of 2020. And combined with already high traffic volumes, these frequent crashes gridlock not only Interstate 81 southbound, but also parallel routes 11/460, impacting communities in the east-west route in the region, in particular North Roanoke County and Hollins, but also the city of Salem. In summary, it is an opportune time to fund widening of this one remaining piece of Interstate 81 to improve safety, reliability, and essential connections between the New River Valley and the Roanoke Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. North. Appreciate you being here. Our next speaker is Mr. Brantley Tyndall. Is that right, Tyndall?
Great.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm Brantley Tyndall, the president of Virginia Bicycling Federation, and I'm here on behalf of VBF and our partners at Virginia Trails Alliance to talk about the great discussion you had about trails today. We're really encouraged by that discussion, and having worked hand in hand with VDOT administrators and staff on trail building projects for the past several years, we think there are a lot of great advantages to VDOT taking leadership on trail projects moving forward. VDOT's management over trails provides an advantage related to leveraging state trail funds, which we have, to get bigger pots of money through the federal government, transportation alternatives, CMAQ, and some other ones. And the transportation environment that many of these trails will interact with is much more complex than some other agencies really deal with rights of way and regulations, and we think that that's a great advantage for getting reducing costs and increasing deliverables and trail quality to make sure that they're safe and operable. Next, I'd like to emphasize that the agency is really uniquely positioned to understand that trails are for transportation, or they can be as one of their primary uses. When you look at trail counters, many of which are publicly owned, for the Washington and Old Dominion Trail, the Virginia Capitol, and Mount Vernon trails, they demonstrate millions of users every year. One trail counter in Roslyn has 3.4 million people every year. VDOT has the best perspective on making sure that those trails are used for transportation. Lastly, we'd really be remiss if we didn't talk about and spotlight the safety benefits of trails, which year after year have contributed basically 0 traffic fatalities. DMV reported last month a 34% increase year to date from last year in pedestrian fatalities. That's about 40 people that were killed by November 1st of this year compared to last year. And their TREDS data actually shows 45% increase. I think it's really important to understand that the future of transportation should be preventing particularly vulnerable road user fatalities, and trails really are the #1 way to do that. Lastly, if I can take my state hat off from Virginia Bicycling Federation, I'm also the director of Bike Walk RVA here in the Richmond region, and really want to take the opportunity to thank this body for supporting the Fall Line Trail very significantly last year, and that project has a lot of steam. So thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. Appreciate you coming today. Next, our next speaker is Heather Richards. Welcome, Ms. Richards. Shenandoah Trail.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and members of the board. My name is Heather Richards. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director and the Virginia State Director for a national nonprofit called the Conservation Fund. We have been in existence since 1985, and in that time we've conserved over 8.5 million acres nationally, serving as the bridge between private landowners and industry, and often state, local, and federal government agencies. And I'm here today because we have been involved in the Shenandoah Rail Trail for over a year now. And the reason we were involved is because Norfolk Southern picked up the phone and gave us a call. We have worked with Norfolk Southern successfully to acquire and then transfer to interim trail managers in North Carolina several projects, and we are now engaged with them also in West Virginia. They asked if we would be interested in working with them. They understood that there was interest in creating a rail trail in the Shenandoah Valley. They are actively trying to sell that corridor, and they thought this would be a good way to move that corridor into a potential rail usage. So we were approached by them in 2021 and began an initial conversation with them about what are you interested in doing? how might this happen? What might it cost? Fortunately, at the same time, the state was producing their feasibility study. That feasibility study estimated the acquisition cost of the rail trail at $15 to $25 million. And I'm pleased to say that based on the appraisal that we have commissioned, that acquisition cost is accurate. I think that it'll probably even be at the lower end of that potentially. But the state's on the right path with the feasibility study that's already been conducted. Unfortunately, our appraisal goes stale in January of next year. So in some ways, time is of the essence. We know what that ground is going to cost today. We don't know what it'll cost a year from now. And my experience in working in real estate is that real estate rarely depreciates, especially rural real estate. Acquiring that corridor through a rail banking process is incredibly important at this point. If the corridor is simply abandoned, the corridor ceases to exist. Under the reversionary clauses that likely underpin Norfolk Southern's ownership of that corridor, if it is sold or out of rail use or abandoned, that land reverts back to whoever owned it in the 1850s or their successors in interest. So rail banking in this case is critical to keeping that corridor intact, both for trail use or future rail use. So that working through the Surface Transportation Board and that rail banking process is important. Norfolk Southern has indicated to me they want to understand who's going to be doing the rail banking, who's going to be operating the trail before they file that notice of abandonment. But they are interested in working through that process with the state or the Conservation Fund or another interim trail manager. I just wanted to mention, Conservation Fund has a long history and a good track record of working with other agencies in the state. We delivered Manchacomico State Park, the state's newest state park in Gloucester County, by acquiring the land, helping to oversee the development of it, and then handing over a fully operational park to Department of Conservation and Recreation in 2020. We've done the same thing with Department of Forestry with the Charlotte State Forest, which is a new facility in Charlotte County. And I look forward to hopefully working with VDOT and DCR to explore ways to develop the Shenandoah Rail Trail in a way that's beneficial to the residents of the valley, to other folks who come to visit. The tourism industry is incredibly important. And also work to develop possibly a new model that would have a partnership between VDOT and DCR to better develop, manage, and operate a very significant rail corridor project down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Ms. Richards. Appreciate it very much. Next speaker is Mr. Brandon Davis. Mr. Davis, you're going to pile on here?
Well, I think the best thing to do would be to cede my 3 minutes to her, because most of what she said is exactly what needed to be said. I guess my purpose then for being here would be to communicate the value that this opportunity represents to the communities in the region and the support that we have. There have been 22 resolutions of support for this. Every single local government in the region, the regional commissions in both regions, as well as a bunch of nonprofits and professional organizations within the region have offered their support for it. We have a very skilled partnership that we have built, and they asked me to be the chair of it. I'm the director of the regional commission in the northern end there. And the team that we've put together, including Ms. Richards, has a unique skill set to be able to handle the communications piece, both within the government side as well as the grassroots public side, a skill which my organization and I lack very significantly. We, in partnership with VDOT and DCR during the development of that feasibility study, received over 9,000 responses to a MetroQuest survey sponsored by VDOT, and 94% of those respondents said that they would use this trail. In addition, we're thankful that DCR worked with VDOT to hire Michael Baker Consultants as part of your on-call program and actually get permission from Norfolk Southern to do an analysis of the condition of the trestles. They were out there and checking the quality of them and giving detailed cost estimates of segments of what needs to be done in order to bring this up. That's all built into that feasibility analysis commissioned by the General Assembly in 2021. This is not a new project. Our engagement with VDOT on this project is, however, new. And that is something I'm not going to apologize for, because it has moved quicker than I ever would have expected. I've worked with VDOT on a lot of projects over the years and will continue to do so. If that TRIP grant had been funded, we would have been working with you on another one, but that's okay. We'll reapply and make a better application next time. The way it works is we build a relationship together so that when it's time to make a decision, everybody's comfortable. And we've put you in a position by moving quickly where you're starting at zero on a project that we've been working on for decades, and we acknowledge that. Nevertheless, we want to give you the confidence that much of the work that needs to be done has already been done, and it's been done by qualified individuals. Our local governments hired a consultant to do an economic feasibility analysis. We have numbers for economic impact that can be shared as well. So there are a number of things that have been accomplished that I won't go on and on about, but we're going to be working with your staff to make sure that whatever information we have that we have full confidence in is shared with your team, so we're not duplicating efforts on work that's already been done. As an example, that appraisal that our local governments sponsored, as well as a bit of private donation, we made sure to select an appraiser who's been used by the Commonwealth, Norfolk Southern, and the Conservation Fund in order to try to use the same appraisal. Normally when this happens, you wind up in a situation with competing appraisals. I think they have a handshake where we're going to use one appraisal and work together collaboratively if we work through the process that we believe we're going to be able to, which would be a unique scenario and one that I'd like to be a part of, that lies within our core mission as a regional commission. So we're here. We're not going away. We're going to be glad to help you in any way that we can. Time is of the essence, and we're going to support your team in helping move this forward as soon as possible if that is the way you want to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Appreciate you being here. Exciting opportunity. And our last speaker is Mr. Rob Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, welcome. Nice to see you, sir.
CTB. I'm Rob Whitfield, the Fairfax County Taxpayers Alliance. And first, a thank you to Secretary Miller. He told me that in October I spoke for 11 minutes, and after the meeting had finished, he talked to me for 10 or 15 minutes. And as he knows, I have many concerns, and unfortunately, those concerns continue to this very day. There was a presentation this morning in the Rail and Public Transit Workshop about the, I'm going to call it the second part of the rail plan for Virginia, which is mainly focused on freight. And I suppose, I don't quite know the time frame when the first part of the study, but obviously COVID-19 hit about March of 2020, and the discussions about transforming rail in Virginia and the Phase 1 funding plan, I'm told by somebody from VPRA that, oh, well, this was agreed in the 6-year plan. Unfortunately, COVID-19, I'm going to say, mangled communications. So I certainly had no idea of what was in and out until somewhat much later in the year. And some of the inequities which were present in the adopted plan still persist. And yesterday in Newington, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission had its annual legislative briefing, and I mentioned to Jennifer DeBrule that I first went to Springfield in 1979 when Joe Alexander unveiled was there for the announcement of the funding of the Blue Line to Springfield, Franconia. I was just amazed that there was no provision in the TRV plan for a rail station for Amtrak in Springfield. I mean, this is a fundamental problem because most of Fairfax County is very distant from an Amtrak station in Union Station or Alexandria. That's about 30 miles away for most people. And you know, I'm sorry, I use my own sense of logic. And it just, It just boggles me that they made this through this plan without even considering Springfield as an Amtrak stop. And I have known Delegate Vivian Watts for over 25 years. I've sat at lunch with her several times, spoke with, and she lives in, actually she told me it's Annandale, not North Springfield. And George Barker, who I've known for a decade, is co-head of the Finance Committee in Senate. I don't care what it takes, and I was told by somebody that it might need an addition to the Council of Governments TPB. You have a huge opportunity for a multimodal transportation center there in Springfield. And the time to get money from federal funding under the whatever it's called, the UCC, I don't remember the name of the initials, the IIJA, sorry, got the wrong act. But the time for studying the long-range possibilities is now. The second item I addressed was the need for a Roslyn bypass on the Metro Rail to connect the Orange and Silver to the Blue Line. I testified to the WMATA board 1 week after the Amazon HQ2 project was announced in November 18. And I can swear on a stack of Bibles, even though I said this to the board, I've never heard one word from them in 4 years. Instead, they proposed a long-range plan for tunnels under the Potomac, which it appears Mr. Bruhl seems to support. I promise you, as a former geotechnical engineer, the cost of the tunnel under the Potomac would be well over $10 billion. Richard Sars, the former general manager of Metro, told me in 2014 they could build a 3/4-mile tunnel for under $2 billion. So let's call it $3 billion today. And to show you how my world is full of chance opportunities, after that meeting yesterday morning, I had to deliver a vehicle to a senior vice president of finance for Bechtel. I'm sitting there waiting for somebody to pick me up, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to get Bechtel to do a public-private partnership with Virginia to build that missing link? So there are endless things what I suggest, sir, is I know you can't answer every question or even most of them, but we've got to find a better way to communicate with one another on various issues. Safety is a paramount concern of mine. I've raised issues on the I-66, the express lanes. Right now, there's no signage on warnings. I don't know what was agreed to with the private partnership, but the only sign I see is something that says 2 axles, no trailers. And it's unclear from where the signs are whether they're applying to the local lanes or the express lanes. I can go on and on and on. And what we need is an ongoing method of communication that doesn't take your time excessively. So I'm open to your suggestion. So finally, I want to end by mentioning former State Senator Charlie Waddell died earlier this year, and I certainly didn't mean to not forget about him because he was one of the first legislators I met down in Richmond in the mid-1990s. And Charlie had worked at American Airlines and later became a state senator and a deputy secretary of transportation. Charlie was from the hills of Georgia, and he was a great example of how people can communicate across party lines. And so I commend to you his memory, and I will hope that I'm sometimes the Grinch, but I'm not always a Grinch.
Mr. Whitfield, we always appreciate your thoughts and your comments. Appreciate it very much you being here. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. They've been distributed in your package. Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
We have a motion and we have a second. Mr. Folks, motion. Mr. Casper, seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 1, limited access control change. Mr. Heltzel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The first item is limited access control changes on our I-81 project in Harrisonburg. These are precipitated by virtue of the project design. We've gone through our process to affect environmental work, public involvement, and the FHWA's approval of these changes. So I ask the board's support in approving them so that we can move the project along.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion and a second from Mr. Laird. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Action item 2, Fall Line Trail in Petersburg, Colonial Heights. Mr. Eltsel.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, this is a continuation of the item I brought to you in October. We picked 5 miles up of location in the northern part of the trail. This request is for location approval. Remaining portions of the trail in Henrico, Chesterfield counties, and the cities of Colonial Heights and Petersburg. We have local endorsements, and it pretty much follows the study work that I spoke about in the October meeting.
So moved. Mr. Brown moves. Is there a second? Second. Mr. Casper, seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 3, action on approval of Interstate I-81 Corridor Improvement Program Progress Report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary,
Mr.
members of the
Covington,
board. I'm here today to present the resolution for a consideration for approval of the I-81 Corridor Improvement Plan Annual Progress Report. In October, at your workshop meeting, I reviewed the major items that are required to be included in that report. They include a reporting on the safety and performance of the I-81 corridor, an assessment of the effectiveness of the operational and capital improvement projects, the status of the capital improvement projects, and the current and projected balances of the I-81 fund. In addition, the I-81 Advisory Committee has submitted a letter to the General Assembly in support of approval of the annual progress report, and the department does recommend approval of the resolution.
Do we have a motion?
Move.
Mr. Folks moves. Is there a second? Second.
Second.
Mr. Merrill seconds. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Covington. Item number 4, Local Assistance Division, action on amendments to regulation and urban maintenance. Mr. Dudley.
Introductory slides for this. And here you go right here. For this action item, we thought it would be beneficial to provide a couple of slides reviewing what the board has already done with regards to this, and make the board aware of one item that we identified as we worked through this resolution. Last month, the board approved a periodic regulatory review resolution which directed staff to amend our administrative code 2430-325, which is our urban maintenance and construction policy, to remove obsolete language that refers to old formula funding that we used back in the before 2009. It was removed from code in 2015, I believe it was, and then bring that language back to the board for action. During that process, we noted that we have an old board policy, 2006, that restates verbatim this administrative code. So for your information, these are the 2 paragraphs that we are proposing to eliminate from the administrative code. One deals with using those funds for debt service, and the other deals with the use of those funds for landscaping. Today's resolution before you requests that the board approve the removal of the obsolete language in the administrative code and to rescind the duplicative CTB policy. So with that background, we recommend approval of the resolution.
Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Sellers moves. Is there a second?
Okay.
Mr. Folks seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Is there any extension? Thank you, Mr. Dudley. Item 5, Ms. Pryor, action on revised 23 through 28 6-year improvement program transfers.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. These are my normal monthly transfers, and I recommend your approval.
A motion?
So moved.
Second. Brown moves. Mr. Casper seconds. Are there any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 6, Ms. Pryor, action on addition of projects to the revised 6-year improvement program.
Thank you. I have an action item to amend 18 projects to the 6-year improvement program. 15 of these are safety in nature. 1 is funded by HR TAC, and 2 are funded by the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and I recommend your approval.
So moved.
Second.
The mic would help. I think Mr. Kasperitz, did you make the motion or did Mr. Brown? And Ms. Sellers, I think, seconded? Okay, great. Thank you. We have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much, Ms. Pryor. Item number 7, Mr. Brule, action on the second revised fiscal year 2023 annual budget for DRPT.
Mr. Secretary and members of the board, this is the update that I briefed you on earlier in the meeting, and we request your approval.
I move.
Dr. Merrill moves. Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Sparks, action on the 6-year improvement program transfers for December 2022.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. DRPT recommends action on the adding projects to the 6-year program, which were presented in the workshop earlier today.
Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
I move. I don't know.
Mr. Folks moved.
Yes.
Mr. Kasperwood seconds. Any discussion? You guys on the right need to get in the game over there, right?
No, I'm sitting over here all home alone. You gotta take care of everything, right? Ready?
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Mr. Sparks, item 9, action on addition of projects, 6-year improvement program for 23 through 28.
Yes, so this similar to the last item, this is for the funding transfers for the projects that were presented earlier this afternoon for inclusion in the 6-year program.
Second.
Mr. Kasperitz moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. Mr. Dotson's busy. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 10, Ms. Aylen, action on approval of Special Structures Program 50-year long-term plan update.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary and members of the board. As a follow-up to the Chief of Maintenance and Operations October presentation on the comprehensive review, I'm requesting your approval of the Special Structures long-term plan.
Mr. Dotson, is there a motion?
Second.
I can multitask.
Mr. Laird seconds. Is there any discussion, Mr. Merrill?
In terms of trying to understand exactly what these special structures by year, will these automatically get plugged into the state's budget, or they have to be submitted? Because I was looking here, I was looking at different amounts of dollars by year for all these different things from by region of the state.
So the Special Structures Fund, sir, has dedicated funding just for the special structures. We're required to come up with a long-term plan for the special structures. And so this is what we're presenting to you. And is it in the budget right now? Yes. But as we go throughout the years, as changes come, there'll be updates. That's why we come to you on an annual basis.
These dollar amounts from the 23-24 budget. I'm sorry, 22-23 budget and 23-24 budgets, these next
Yes,
two?
sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Birch.
I think, Mr. Merrill, are you asking that the first four years are contained in the state's budget? So the answer would be yes. The $80 million that is set aside now in perpetuity for this project, or these projects, are all set aside as part of the state's budget.
Bless you.
That satisfied?
Good with that. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill. All right, any other discussion? Have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Byers moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
The next item, Mr. Lawson, if you'll come up. So let me say a couple things before Mr. Lawson gets started. I know we've had a fair amount of conversation over the last 6 or 8 weeks about sort of the process of these projects being proposed. And historically, we've had one such program be funded, proposed and funded by this board. Mr. Kasperitz, it was the rail project down in Southwest Virginia, part of that. And the way that that occurred historically is not necessarily, it's sort of what we're doing today, but to Mr. Kasperitz, my discussion earlier, and others with you, perhaps that's not the best way. So we came to you in October and told you at that time there were 2 projects that we were going to recommend to you. And we talked about them briefly, but not as a robust a fashion as we could have. And that's probably because you know, we've been doing that, and I guess our view was that we had done that enough times that everybody was familiar with it. You know, we have a corridor improvement group, the 81 corridor group, that we just presented a lot of this to. Certainly the gap has been discussed a lot with this board. And so, you know, those are recommendations from us to you to approve these projects. What we did not do, I mean, and you certainly were able to bring your own projects to bear if you wanted them to be considered. But I think in retrospect, it would be better to in the future, and while I'll stand by these projects and we'll tell you why they're important to the Commonwealth and why they're the ones that we recommend, I think it'd be better in the future if we back up a little bit, get some recommendations to you earlier, do a little bit deeper dive in the workshop. We talked about in the last meeting some of the things that Mr. North talked about in his statement here, particularly as it related to 81. But again, in retrospect, it might be better to spend a little bit more time and socialize these in a better way, regardless of how we've done it in the past. This is only our second one, so it's sort of like round 2 of Smart Scale. And with that, that would be my pledge to you as we move forward. As long as I'm here, we'll get these in the hopper a little bit earlier. We'll continue to recommend to you from the administration, if you will, the projects that we think you should consider. But at the end of the day, this board decides what this board decides, right? And that's why you're here, is to make those determinations. So with that as sort of a backdrop, I'll let Mr. Lawson present the action items, and then we can have further discussion.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, thank you for that intro. That was very helpful. As I mentioned last month, there were 2 projects that we wanted to bring before you for consideration. And to consider
October.
Pardon?
October.
October, yes. We kind of missed November, didn't we? So those 2 projects, again, the projects are being brought to you for submission into Smart Scale for evaluation. The action is not funding the projects. It's being putting the projects in the mix for consideration.
Let me say one other thing, because I think this is important, particularly as we talk about the things that we'd like to tweak about Smart Scale to make it a better program. This board has the authority, Mr. Lawson, and correct me if I'm incorrect. This board has the authority to pick any project it wants and fund it. It's in the program, regardless of the score, regardless, right? We can do that, right? This board can do that. Now, if we start doing that on any kind of regular basis, we've got a failed program, right? If we got a scoring system and we just ignore it, then we're back to where we started, right? But having said that, there are times, and you know, we talked about, for example, earlier in the meeting today, where we don't have the ability in the scoring process to look ahead. And even if we know something is guaranteed to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, the scoring will not score it, right? It will not be included in the scoring. And so it's an important power that we have to be used, in my view, very rarely. but to select projects outside of the system. And I'm not suggesting we do any of that on any of these two or any others. I'm just letting you know that that's the authority that we do have. So these projects will be submitted purely for scoring. We'll dump them in just like we were if we were a NPO or some other entity that's allowed to put these projects forward. We'll dump these into the scoring system and we'll see how they score. And that will lead us to another decision as to whether we want to fund them or not. And again, it could be the best project and we could choose not to fund it. It could be the worst project and we could choose to fund it, worst in terms of the scoring. That's our authority. But that comes obviously with consequences when we get into that game. So I'm sorry, John.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. So the two projects before you today, the first one is the I-64 GAP project. I think we've spoken quite a bit about that project. It is to complete the widening of 64 to 3 lanes in each direction between Lightfoot and Bottoms Bridge. It's roughly 29 miles. The project is estimated today at about $750 million. We were fortunate to receive from the General Assembly last session about $470 million in funding toward the project. Mr. Brown, thank you. The CVTA has committed $100 million to this project, and we have a grant application in with the federal government for potentially up to $150 million for the project, and we continue to just have discussions with Hampton Roads on how they can contribute to funding for this project as well. The region has considered it unanimously to be a high priority project for them as well. As we move forward with this project, we clearly recognize that the benefits that it will bring to enhance commerce, create jobs, improve safety, provide travel time savings, and just boost overall regional activity, connecting Richmond and Hampton Roads in a much more seamless manner. So, Mr. Secretary, that is kind of my brief overview of the I-64 GAP project, and if there's no questions, I would recommend approval.
Do we have any questions? Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It says 470 from the General Assembly and 100 million from the Central Virginia Planning.
Correct.
And then a federal grant of 150, which gets us to 720. And
It's close, yes, it does.
So the gap is about 60 million. If we were successful in getting the federal grant, the gap between, because I think, oh, it's 750? Oh, I thought you said 780, I'm sorry.
750.
750, okay. So the gap is only 30 million.
Pretty good. I remain, because I'm this way, I remain cautiously optimistic about our federal partners helping us on this. And I think we'll know in the not too distant future whether that's well-placed optimism or whether it's not. But I think I remain optimistic. Any other questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the submission of this project into the process?
So moved.
Mr. Coleman moves. Is there a second? Mr. Brown seconds.
Enthusiasm, I think.
Enthusiastically. Mr. Brown, your support has been extremely important to this project as well as
Mind if I ask
everyone.
Mr. Stanton whether I can make the motion and he would mind seconding me?
You can make the motion, Mr.
You
Brown.
don't mind?
We'll let Mr. Brown make the motion.
I've been 8 years on this.
Mr. Brown, we're gonna have an alternate motion. Mr. Brown's making the motion.
But he's got to put a few more million in.
That's right. Hey, you know.
We really like what he's done.
We get involved in the makeup of the gap.
Exactly.
Is that all right with you?
That's all right with me. Mr. Stant, you want to make the second?
Second.
And we'll have a hard third by Mr. Coleman. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, the second project for consideration is a widening project on I-81. This project, as mentioned, it's a southbound widening between exits 128 and 137 And I will point out a technical correction in the resolution before you, the bottom of the first page. It says that this would be the final segment between Blacksburg and Salem Roanoke. It should be Christiansburg, Salem Roanoke, just to correct that technicality. So to that point, as I mentioned, the northbound widening for this same segment is funded and is scheduled for construction, I think, in 27, if I have my facts straight there. And the desire here is to advance the southbound widening at the same time period to receive all the efficiencies and economies of scale of getting both efforts done at once. And Mr. North did a great job of explaining some of the benefits of this project and moving it forward now as we move forward with the northbound widening. And obviously this project was looked at as one of the next projects that would advance with the funding that would be coming available in the early 2030s following the funding of the original 10-year plan, I'll call it, as they would say. So that is this project. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or Commissioner or others have some additional comments. This project would be a very, very great improvement as we continue to improve I-81 and experience the benefits that the widenings and the improvements of that 81 plan are providing.
Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Commissioner.
I'm going to ask Bart Thrasher, the Chief Engineer, to come up and add in where I may leave off. I think at the October workshop meeting, we had discussed there were several questions as to the configuration of the lanes in the northbound and southbound. I think Mr. North did do an admirable job in describing the situation along the corridor to be able to reflect that right now, traveling in the northbound direction as it's planned from Christiansburg to Troutville, over those 32 miles, we'll have a contiguous section in the northbound direction for we'll have 3 lanes that full 32 miles. However, in the southbound direction, we do find ourselves with a 9-mile section that would be affected, that is not currently funded in the plan and is not programmed. However, I'll point out that when we did the original plan, we identified about 106 projects for potential funding at about $4 billion. The $2 billion that we were able to secure took forward the 64 projects. And as John said, this particular project that is 9 miles in length that would create a contiguous network of 3 lanes southbound from Troutville to Christiansburg in the southbound direction is one of those 5 projects that have been identified by staff that were originally identified for funding in 2032. I believe, Mr. Merrill, you asked last time what the consideration was as to why we would want to put this forward. And I'd say there's a great deal of economy of scale that continues to be available to us to advance a northbound and a southbound project simultaneously. We're going to fight inflation. We're going to fight design standards. We're going to fight the standpoint of being in a position that we're going to impact the travelers in that same 9-mile section twice over a 10-year period. If we go, I'm not sure what the schedule is right now, but the northbound section's already funded. The southbound, when we do this, if we need to come back, we're going to pay for mobilization twice and then added cost rather than mobilizing once. So it's a combination of issues that we feel that really the impact to the traveling community would be impacted once. There's an economy of scale to be had. It is one of the original projects that were identified, and I'd point out that these 5 other projects that have been identified by staff to be able to advance in the 2032 realm, this is number 4 out of those 5 projects that need to advance. So we think that there's a great deal of synergy that can be created by combining the northbound and the southbound direction, and this would solve that problem, and we create 32 miles of contiguous 3-lane sections, both northbound and southbound.
Questions?
Chief Engineer, did I miss anything with that?
Mr. Merrill.
Yeah.
covered everything,
Yeah,
sir.
thank you, Mr. Secretary. No, I appreciate, Mr. Lawson, your explanation. Mr. Bridge, I certainly recognize that. My concern, and I know you referenced this, Mr. Secretary, as a member of the ID1 Advisory Committee, I specifically asked at our July meeting about how we can go about prioritizing next projects. And I was told that we'll have a process to discuss these through the ID1 Advisory Committee, which had not. I would submit also at the present time there's a project at exit 300 southbound, the intersection of I-66 to ID1 going south, and there's been a pressure to have widening on the northbound as well, because that is a huge bottleneck for people, especially for people on the weekends who travel out of DC, who go south into the mountains and up and down the valley. That is one of the worst sections, in my view, of 81. When you're coming northbound on Saturday and Sunday, you will see traffic backed up for miles. Southbound is funded, at the I-66, I-81 intersection. There's a 4-mile stretch that's being, I think, out to bid soon, if not already. The northbound is the same kind of pressure, with northbound on I-81 going up to I-66. So that was one of the projects that was identified as potential. So I'm at a loss to explain to my constituents, and also with the pressure that we're facing. Winchester and Frederick County, to be honest, were on the later stages of the I-81 improvement program. And we've seen very little activity. Harrisonburg, we're getting ready to go to bid, as we learned earlier, on 6 lanes there. But there's nothing up in the northern part of the valley other than this I-66, I-81 intersection. And the economic development and the residential development and growth has just been immense. And we're really getting no relief until 2028. So I'm like, okay, how do I go about petitioning for consideration of things of projects in this jurisdiction? So I do not have anything against the project, because I would like to see ID1 have 6 lanes most of the way from West Virginia down to Tennessee, knowing that that's probably not going to happen. But I do sense that I'm failing my district and not getting any improvements for the significant amount of congestion that we're seeing and the constraints that we're seeing on economic growth.
What I'd say is, Bart or Dave, with the 2028 timeframe, do we have that? Are we on schedule for a 2028 improvement then? Yes. I do think, Mr. Merrill, we are fiscally constrained at this point for the entire program, and as what we've been saying is that I think we've leaned forward, and the suite of projects that we do have moving at this point in time are all fiscally constrained based upon both the TIFIA loan basis as well as the IOEP monies that are coming in. And if we could advance it faster, we certainly would. But I think what this does is just gives us the opportunity to finish a contiguous 32 miles that is in existence, rather than creating an hourglass right in the middle of where we have 3-lane sections already in place today. I think to be honest with you, I think if we had it over to do again with the prioritization when we set the plan, I think we should have taken a step back and actually looked at what we were creating in that place and taking it from a 3-lane to a 2-lane and then back to a 3-lane, even though that it might have been ranked outside of the $2 billion and maybe have done it differently. I understand the similar comparatives, but I think the difference here is that we have 3 lanes for 32 miles or 23 miles in this case, that's going to create an hourglass right in the middle of it, and we have an opportunity to fix it.
Mr. Commissioner, when will the funds be available for projects that we're talking about now, whether it's 81 or 64, in the smart scale budget? Last 2 years.
The last 2 years of the program.
So that would be what?
28 and 29?
829.
So when are we doing the projects up north that Mr. Merrill is referencing?
Winchester widening is scheduled to go to construction in 2027. Northbound I-81 leading to I-66 eastbound would be later than that. It's not yet adopted into the program. It is on that course.
What does later than that mean? I know what later than that means. Don't answer it that way.
It has not been programmed at this point in time beyond the 2032.
Mr. Secretary, can I ask Bart a question? What about the crash history of the two sections, comparable, obviously, from the 66 coming into 81, where Mark was talking about, compared to the area down in from Christiansburg to the crashes? I mean, are there more accidents in the southern part we were talking about compared to the northern part of 81?
So, Mr. Dodson, I don't know the crash data for the 6681 area Mr. Miller refers to, but out of we had 64 projects that we did in the first tranche of projects on 81, and that's what we're working through now. Out of the remaining 42 that we have left, this project, the southbound 127 to 137 to 128, ranks as number 4, and that's based off of personal hours of delay, crash frequency, and access to jobs. That was what we originally looked at the projects about back in 2018. So it's number 4. And out of that, the three projects that are ahead of it, is an XL lane and a decel lane at 132, which would be taken care of.
Which is where?
It's up in Christiansburg. So it would be taken care of with the northbound lane of 127 to 138. And then the project right above it is the overlap at 200 to 195 on 81, which is down in Stanton. So it is the next project up based on the original priorities we assigned back in 2018. And that did involve crash data.
Thank you.
Mr. Merrill, as you know, and the rest of y'all, 81 is a beast, right? It's a beast, right? We all know that. And the 81 corridor improvement plan, which is robust and great, still not enough, right? We identified, I think in the beginning of this, over $4 billion worth of projects that we'd like to do tomorrow, right? And we had $2 billion to do it with. So we cut projects and did the most impactful, as we saw it, $2 billion. There's also the, sort of so I would say this administration is keenly focused on how to advance 81 in a more substantial way than we currently are planning. And as you know, we're looking at stuff on the north side of that area, up in your area, of looking at other opportunities there. So I won't tell you we're trying to spread the peanut butter, but obviously this is a little bit further south. It's between Roanoke and Roanoke, Blacksburg, Christiansburg area. Lots of traffic, lots of growth, and we've got this opportunity to save some money by doing it now. It has a high crash history. It was the next project in line. So it sort of just came together as we're looking at 81 to do something else up where you're talking about, hopefully, nothing's guaranteed here. And we want to do more on 81 in general. This was the next project up. We could save money if we did it now, and that's why we brought it to you in October. So all I can tell you is that, we can, in the future, certainly, we'll have more robust an experience in this. But at some point, the administration / me needs to recommend. And you all get to decide whether you like those recommendations or whether you want to have your own. And we're recommending this. We stand by the recommendation because we think it makes the most sense for the Commonwealth overall, and frankly, the most sense for 81 overall. And that's why we're recommending it.
Mr. Secretary, I was going to add the conversation. Since there's no interstate in the Lynchburg district, so I'm a kind of outside observer, and I do travel the state. People in the Upper Valley do not live and congregate down in the New River Valley, Roanoke Valley. People in the New River Valley, Roanoke Valley do not go up to, so everybody's in their same area. I do remember that a number of board of supervisors voted against the tax increase as far as the gas increase for the 81 corridor. And only two of the party that has the governorship voted, one delegate and one state senator. I say that because people are frustrated because you don't get things done faster. But you haven't failed anybody. You've done a great job on this board, and you represent your area extremely well. It's just patience, and this money doesn't come out of nowhere. So I believe that and the crash history is a lot more in the southern part of 81 than there. So you're doing a good job, Mr. Merrill. Don't take it upon yourself. You're not doing a good job. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir. Ms. Lawson.
Further to this, as I understand it, the action here is to kick this into smart scale for that prioritization analysis.
I shouldn't say that's all, but that's it.
No, and that's important.
It is.
And the questions that are being asked are good ones, and what I would ask is before we vote on this as we go forward, is let's have the breakdown of that. I greatly appreciated the speaker reminding us of the significance of 81 and the truck volume and the value of goods and the amount of congestion and crashes. What I've not been able to find is the breakdown. And what I'm talking about is the crash breakdown, the economic value breakdown. And that's what we ought to be looking at, because it's the beast you describe. Unfortunately, we got to prioritize this thing and eat it one bite at a time. And my suggestion would be is that when we do the proper analysis, we may find some other segments of 81 that are more deserving. If we could do it all, it'd be great, but we can't.
Let me be clear about how this works. There are 400 and some projects that have been submitted to Smart Scale for round 5. Right? These would be 2. Right? They'll go in the hopper and they'll get scored in whatever category they belong in, right? They'll get scored. And then after they're scored, we have, they cost a certain amount of money and we have a certain amount of money. And so we sort of look at, okay, what's scored the best and how much can we fund? And we draw the line when we run out of money. It's sort of how it works, right? Now, what I said earlier is we can jump the we can jump over the line, right? We can take the very worst scoring project and fund it, and we can take the very highest scoring project and not fund it. I don't recommend that. I don't think we'll do that, but we can. So it is important that we're putting it in, because if we don't put it in, it's got no chance, right? But it will be scored against whatever else is already in there. It won't be scored against other opportunities. We'll have to make our own judgment about that. It's only going to be scored relative to the other projects that it competes against. And so I want to make sure, I want to make clear, particularly for those who are new to this process, that we can't just select another project that's not in the scoring because we determined that we thought it was a better thing to do on 81. If it hasn't been submitted, it's not eligible to be scored. If it's not eligible to be scored, it's not scored. If it's not scored, it can't get funded. That's how it works. So it doesn't mean we couldn't find some other way, perhaps, or whatever. We're working on that as well. But it seemed to us, based on what you've heard today, to be the most impactful, the most important of the projects. It was at the top of the next list, if you will, that had not been addressed. And obviously we have which doesn't, well, get rid of the hourglass, we get rid of the double mobilization, we get rid of all those things. And so for those reasons, all the other ones, that's why we recommended it. That simple. Could have recommended a different one.
I just wanted to echo, the smart scale system process, again, not to repeat what the Secretary has already said, was designed to wring out much of the politicization in transportation funding that had plagued our process for 100 years. where, you know, it was literally who had the influence, who had the leverage, who had the caucus on the board could drive a project. This created some objectivity around it, but it wasn't designed to take out, and I think former Secretary Lane used to say this, to take out the human component, right? So there are times where, and I can speak to 64 now that the vote, I didn't want to speak to it before the vote happened. There are times where, for example, everybody knows something needs to be done, but because we limited the number of applications that each jurisdiction can pick, and it's as much in mine as it is in theirs, or because I have jurisdictions that will send me 3 number 1 projects because they're cutting deals on their board and they can't get one to agree that one is more important than the other. But there's a collective wisdom and understanding that certain things have to happen, and there may be a collective input and reckoning from VDOT and the commissioner and others that if you're going to do this, the best, most efficient way for the Commonwealth is to do this together or simultaneously as opposed to doing it in parts. And so I want to just stress that doing this is not corrupting, disrespecting, bastardizing I don't know if I can say that, Mr. Dobbs, the smart scale procedure. It's actually to optimize it, right? And the program that we adopted, which we control, which we could decide to rip up tomorrow and not ever do it again, was never designed to take away this board's discretion and awareness. For example, in our district, we've had projects, a dozen, not a dozen, 5 roundabouts funded at $8 million apiece. And I have a major congestion issue on 288 that impacts 4 jurisdictions. I have defunded those roundabouts that scored well because of the way that our process would work to fund that major widening or access jurisdiction. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. This is what happened with the scoring. You guys are telling me collectively that you'd rather have this versus that. So I'm going to go to the board and I'm going to make my phone calls and we're going to get that reordered. So that's what's supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen willy-nilly. It's supposed to happen. And we've never had someone come in when something like that happened and object to it. Because if we're doing our jobs, we've brought the communities and the regions along with us. So I just wanted to double down on that issue that it is not some anomaly, right, for the board to have this interaction. But we should do it thoughtfully and carefully. We should be able to articulate and explain it, why we did it. But if we do it that way, we've yet to see the community react in a way that was not anything but supportive.
Mr. Chairman, I have appreciated the opportunity to chat with many members of this board about this matter over the last several days. And the concern, the primary concern that I have heard and agree with is that we need to have, going forward, an opportunity for individual members of the board to lift up projects for consideration. And, 2 years ago, the secretary then brought forward 1 or 2 projects for consideration. To my knowledge, those didn't come from the board. They came from the administration, and we submitted them to Smart Scale. Now we have 2 others here that have come the same route, although in the case of these 2, we were told about them at the previous meeting. And I want to move that we include the project as proposed by the administration for consideration in Smart Scale, with the assurance that in the future that we will have an opportunity as individual board members, if we want to lift up projects, to do so. The hour is now late with regard to the current Smart Scale process, so I think we need to move on, and I move that we include this project with the understanding that there will be an opportunity in future smart scale rounds for individual members of the board to bring forward projects they wish to have considered, in plenty of time for that to be a general discussion within this board, and we as a board decide which projects we're going to lift up.
So we have a motion. We'll consider additional discussion after we get a second.
Second.
I'll second it.
All right. Mr. Lawson seconds. Dr. Smoot moved, Mr. Lawson second. Is there further discussion? All right, hearing none, we have a motion. Yes, sir, Mr. Kaspertz.
Yeah, although I don't doubt question the value of this project, nor the comments made by both staff and my colleagues today, I lack the specific information on alternatives to make an informed vote today. So I will choose to respectfully abstain, simply because I lack that information.
What alternatives would you like, Mr. Kaspertz?
Well,
we can give you about 600 if you want.
Fairly exhaustive review of the alternatives. I know we're attempting to do that here today, but it's something that I would personally benefit from in a robust workshop session where we have a chance to review the information in advance, do our individual research, and then spend time discussing it as a board rather than on the day of the vote.
Mr. Kaspertz, with due respect, it's not just the day of the vote. We brought this to you 7 weeks ago. We had 7 weeks to discuss it. I don't think that's enough, but it didn't just happen today, number one. Number two, I'll be happy to work with you on a process, but when you say bring alternatives, I can bring you 1,000 alternatives. What alternatives would you like the administration to bring to you for consideration? I think the issue is we're going to give you what we think. We're going to give you enough information so that individuals can bring what they think. We certainly have tons of plans. We've got tons of projects. We've got tons of submissions. I don't know how to represent each individual's desires in terms of alternatives. What I'd prefer to do is to back up enough so that individuals can bring suggested alternatives that we can do a little bit of work on. But there is a limit,
Sure.
right? There is a limit. And so I don't think you can rely on the administration to bring you a bunch of alternatives that may or may not scratch the itch that individual members have. I'd rather that come from individual members with enough time and enough information that they can bring it themselves. So I don't disagree with that process. I just want to say that's what I would be looking for. Sort of like what Mr. Brown did in a way, different situation, but he had an itch that he needed to get scratched, and he didn't like the way it was working, and he brought it to us with his.
Using the process you've described in the future, I'd be inclined to vote to affirm and approve. Today, I lack the information to do so.
It's fine.
Mr. Secretary, we're going to call by individuals when we make the vote.
Intend to. I'm going to ask for, like I always ask, I'm going to ask for yeas and nays and abstentions. Mr. Kaspertz has already told me he's going to abstain.
Secretary, may I say something before
yes,
we
sir,
vote?
Ms. Fox.
And, I represent, of course, the Bristol District, which includes 1/3 of Interstate 81 from the Tennessee line all the way past Winchester. And I travel the length of I-81 going from exit 13 all the way to Arlington, Virginia, which includes the section that Mr. Merrill talked about. This area that we're talking about in the Roanoke Valley encompasses the largest metropolitan area on Interstate 81, the entire 300 miles. City of Roanoke, City of Salem, Botetourt County, Roanoke County, all the way to Christiansburg and then on to Blacksburg, and then with the growth of Virginia Tech and Radford, while the bottleneck may exist on I-6681, that intersection, the traffic in the Roanoke Valley in this section that we're discussing is 24/7. It's heavily traveled. And what we have now, as been mentioned, is a bottleneck from where part of I-81 South has been 3-laned then you have this area that, the void, and then you've got the truck lanes to Christiansburg. And so that's what's created a huge problem. And then, as the Commissioner talked about, the efficiencies of doing the northbound and southbound lanes together, it just makes all the sense in the world. So I urge my brothers and sisters on this board to approve this motion and this resolution to move forward and put it in smart scale and see how it does, see how it performs.
Anyone else? We have a motion and we have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Mr. Casperts is going to abstain.
Will abstain.
Mr. Casperts abstains. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Scheduling and contracts, Mr. Ben Coker. Bids. Mr. Bart's going to do it.
On a double shift, sir. So, Mr. Chair, members of the board, we're bringing several projects to you today. First, help if I have this. This is a plant mix job, interstate on 95 in Hampton Roads District. We had 2 bidders. It was within range. Allen Myers is a contractor. We recommend approval.
Is there a motion? Mr. Stamp moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you.
Next item, this is a bridge repair in North Virginia District. It is over I-95. It's a rehab of both our northbound and southbound bridges. This was had 3 bidders. The low bid was in the range of the evaluative estimate. Contractors Martin's Construction Corporation out of Falls Church. VDOT recommends approval of the bid.
So moved.
Second.
Casper's moves. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? In favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Any abstentions? 866.
Next one is item 66. Sorry. There we go. It's in Richmond District. It's a bridge rehab of a Pemberton Road over I-64. We had 6 contracts on the bid. The low bid was in the evaluative estimate range. Contractors Catton Construction out of Charlottesville. VDOT recommends approval.
So moved.
Mr. Brown moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Merrill seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. 878.
Next one is a smart scale road construction in our Lynchburg district. Construction adding additional lane and drainage, installing street lighting and landscaping. We had 3 bids. The low bid was just outside of the evaluated range at 5.1. Pearson Contracting is a contractor. VDOT recommends approval.
Move the resolution.
Mr. Dotson moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. All in favor say, or excuse me, is there further discussion? In favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. 871.
Next contract is Lynchburg District as well. We had 4 bidders. It is on, this is the Berry Hill Connector. We had, again, 4 bidders. Branch Highway Civil was the low bid at 17.4 within the evaluative estimate range. VDOT recommends approval of the project.
Move the resolution.
Mr. Dotson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Casper, seconds. Further discussion? In favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Number 405.
Next is plant mix in our secondary. This is in Richmond District. We had 2 bids within the evaluative range. Slurry Pavers was a contractor. VDOT finds good value and recommend approval of the bid.
Moved.
Mr. Brown
Second.
moves.
Second.
Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. 865.
Next item is Richmond District again. It is a bridge rehab. It's a SGR. This will remove a structurally deficient bridge. We had 5 bidders. The low bid contractor was Orders Construction at 6.6. VDOT finds good value and recommends approval.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Brown moves. Dr. Smoot seconds. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right. Hampton Roads District.
Final is Hampton Roads District. This was a design build project. This is our HREL 1 Alpha. We had 3 bidders. The low bid came in at 163, which has exceeded our range by approximately 3% of the high evaluated estimate. Allen Myers is a contractor. We believe we got good bids, and we recommend approval of the project.
Moved.
Okay.
Stan moves. Mr. Coleman seconds. By the way, this is a locally funded, this is the HR TAC funded project, correct? All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion?
Just one question, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir, Mr. Merrill.
How long is this stretch of road that's being widened for 160?
Long?
Yeah, 163 million for how many miles?
So is that about, what, 3? 3.5?
Lots of bridges. Hey, listen, we did, closer up your way, we did about that long, it took us 600 million.
That's his way.
It's expensive when you get in all those fancy overpasses and bridges and all sorts of stuff.
I know,
It's a lot
I'm
of
just
money.
curious.
It's a lot of money, Mr. Merrill, I agree with you.
VDOT recommends
We
approval,
have a
sir.
motion and we have a second. Further discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions?
And it's the final bid, sir.
Thank you very much. So I think that is a final item on our agenda. Appreciate you all being here and working through this with us. We've again been able to at least shorten your time up away from your other duties to a day, and we'll continue to try to do that as it makes sense. So I appreciate you working with us. And
I miss seeing you very much, Mr. Secretary. I don't know if a day will fulfill my desire to be around you so much.
You should have come last night, Mr. Dodson.
I got in at 2 o'clock last night. I apologize.
With that, meeting's adjourned.